Excellency Sheikh Hisham bin Abdul Rahman Al Khalifa, Governor of the Capital Governorate and the patron of this event. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, members of the press, and ladies and gentlemen. It's with great pleasure that we welcome you to this evening, and thank you for attending the opening ceremony of Towards Sustainable Entrepreneurship Forum, an initiative of Manama Entrepreneurship Week. The aim of Manama Entrepreneurship Week is to promote sustainable development and social entrepreneurship, and to foster an environment highly conducive to innovation and entrepreneurship in order to achieve continual development, sustainability, and economic prosperity. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. معالي الشيخ هشام بن عبد الرحمن آل خليفة محافظ محافظة العاصمة راعي الحفل. أصحاب السعادة، ضيوفنا الكرام. يطيب لنا في مساء هذا اليوم أن نشكركم لحضوركم افتتاح ملتقى نحو استدامة ريادة الأعمال، إحدى مبادرات أسبوع المنامة لريادة الأعمال، والذي يهدف إلى دعم قطاع ريادة الأعمال في مملكة البحرين وتمكين فئة الشباب في مختلف المجالات. والآن يتفضل معالي الشيخ هشام بن عبد الرحمن آل خليفة بتكريم الرعاة والداعمين والمتحدثين، فليتفضل مشكوراً. And now I would like to welcome to the stage His Excellency Sheikh Hisham bin Abdul Rahman Al Khalifa, the patron of this event, to honor the partners, sponsors, and speakers. Please welcome the strategic partner, Tamkeen. Platinum sponsor, Ahli United Bank. Supporting partner, the Embassy of the United States to Bahrain, who has been supporting MEW for 5 years. Izaka Bahrain chapter, represented by its chairman, Dr. Mazan Ali, who is also a speaker at this forum. Startup Factory, represented by Hamid Fakhru, who is also a speaker at this forum. Social media partner, Social Media Club. The organizer of Manama Entrepreneurship Week, CREO. Now please allow me to welcome the speakers. Professor Robert Langer. Mr. Jeff Hoffman. Mr. Miguel Gamino. Mr. Khalil Al-Shafi'i. Mr. B. Chandra Shekhar. Mr. Ali Murtada. Dr. Bijan Majidi. Sinan Khatib. Dr. Hala Hatoum. Ms. Shaima Almir. And I'm honored to be awarded myself. Thank you, Your Excellency, for patronizing this event and honoring our partners, sponsors, and speakers who make this event a success. And now we will begin with the forums program. نشكر معالي المحافظ على تكريمه الرعاة والمساهمين. والآن نبدأ أعمال الملتقى. Nothing can be more inspiring than startup stories. We'll start our program today with what I've learned from founding more than 40 startups. Yes, not one or two, 40 startups. With Professor Robert Langer, American scientist, inventor, entrepreneur, chemical engineer, and David H. Koch Institute professor at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I certainly, as a professor, I never thought when I started that I would be involved in starting even one startup. But I had this desire, as I'll go over, that as we would do the research that we do at MIT, I didn't want to just write papers. I wanted to see the science that we did really make a difference in the world. So the only way I could see that happening was to actually start these companies myself with my students. So I thought I'd give you a few examples of those 40. These are not necessarily even the most spectacular examples. I have a list at the end of all of them. But I thought I'd go through maybe going across some of the challenges. And I'm going to start with the beginning about how this happened in the first place. So I'm a chemical engineer, and when I finished my work, I did something that was very different from most chemical engineers at that time. This was 1974. Most of my colleagues at MIT, when I was a graduate student, went to work for oil companies. But I wasn't that excited about that, and I ended up going to work in a surgery department at Boston Children's Hospital, which was part of Harvard Medical School. And I was actually the only engineer in the entire hospital. And the person I was working with, Dr. Judah Folkman, he had this idea that if you could stop blood vessels, that maybe that would be a whole new way of treating cancer and other diseases. And I was very excited about that idea. I didn't know anything about it, but it sounded to me very exciting. What I didn't realize is that nobody else in the world thought it was very exciting. But, and there were several challenges with it. One of them was that to try to study how blood vessels worked, it took about 9 or 10 weeks to do the experiment. And the substances that we were using were what we call fairly large molecules. So we had to have a way to take little tiny, almost nano or microparticles and deliver those into the body for many months. And these large molecules, you'd actually really need to have such a system. Let me just make sure I'm doing this. Because almost every large molecule is destroyed right away in a matter of minutes, sometimes seconds. The only thing is that when we tried to put them in these little plastics or polymers, the conventional wisdom was that that wouldn't work. In fact, people had written about this as we started. They wrote that polymer matrices for slowly releasing things have been virtually restricted to very small molecules. And sometimes I think the only reason that I succeeded is I hadn't read any of this. So I tried anyhow. I experimented for 2 years in the lab. I actually experimented with many different techniques, and I found over 200 different ways to get this to not work. But eventually I was able to make little microparticles and even nanoparticles. Here's a picture of one and one cut in half. And what we were able to show, published in Nature, the journal, is that you could get release of any of these substances with these approaches for over 100 days. And we even worked out ways over time to get constant release. But I remember when I first presented this work at a scientific meeting, I was 27 years old, and I had practiced this talk for many weeks. And I was the youngest person by far giving a speech, and there were a lot of older, very famous scientists there. So I gave this talk for 20 minutes, and at the end I thought I did all right. I didn't forget too much what I was going to say. I didn't stammer too much. And so I thought when I was done with this talk that all these older scientists, being nice people, would want to encourage me, this young guy. But when I got done, I stepped off of the podium, and a number of them came up to me and they said, "We don't believe anything you just said." They said that these molecules just can't get through the polymer any more than, say, we could walk through a wall. And just to show you in particular, they said that the large molecules can't diffuse through the polymer, and the solvents we were using would destroy whatever we put in. And actually, things kind of went downhill from there. I was actually, like I say, working as what was called a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard, and I wrote grants to try to get my research funded. And my first 9 were rejected. And then, a lot of my friends said I should try to get a faculty position. And I'm a chemical engineer, so I applied to faculty departments around the world, and actually not a single chemical engineering department would hire me. So I ended up joining a nutrition department. Now the reason I got that job was the head of that department was a very famous nutritionist called Nevin Scrimshaw, and he was what I'd call a benevolent dictator in academics. So he liked me, so he hired me, but he didn't bother to ask the rest of the department what they thought. And that would have probably been okay, except for the fact that the year after I joined the department, he left. So a lot of the senior faculty decided to give me advice, and their advice is I should leave too. I will back that up. One of my friends, Michael Marletta, he's a very famous chemist at Berkeley. He was with me at MIT at the time, and he was describing this a few years ago. And I'll just read you this quote. He said, "One evening, I went to a faculty dinner with myself and some senior MIT professors. He said, a senior scientist sat quizzing us while smoking a cigar. He said, when the older scientist heard my concepts for polymeric drug delivery, he blew a cloud of smoke in my face and said, you better start looking for another job. And Mike said he thought he was in a Fellini movie. So that wasn't so good. But I kind of kept at it, and eventually I figured out even how this was all working. And the way we did that is we cut sort of thin sections through the plastics. This is what they normally look like, and they do look like a wall. But it turned out the way we incorporated substances into these, it actually changed the structure to this. So there was all these like pores. And if you did a lot of imaging, what you'd see is that the pores are interconnected. They're also incredibly winding and tortuous. So it takes an incredibly long time for molecules to get through or drugs to get through. And you can actually even make this take several years if you want to. And just as an example, to prove that we could do this, we were able to isolate those substances that stop blood vessels from growing. One of them, Avastin, now is the largest, one of the one or two largest selling drugs in history. It's a way to treat cancer, and some of its derivatives are used in treating different diseases of blindness, like macular degeneration and diabetic retinopathy. But here, just as a proof of principle, we took a little pellet and we released insulin in diabetic rats for several months. One of the things that people often ask me about in biotech, what are some of the important things? And in biotechnology, one of the really important things is a patent. And in the 1970s, even though I was working at Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School, the Children's Hospital, one of the best children's hospitals in the world, the one in Boston, they never had a patent. So we actually filed for a patent for the first time in history. And what happened was 5 years in a row, the patent examiner turned it down. He rejected it. So the head of the hospital came to see me, along with some of the lawyers for the hospital, and they said that I should quit. I should stop because the patent examiner was never going to allow it. But I don't like to quit. That's probably another important thing for an entrepreneur. But I was trying to think, how could we convince the patent examiner to allow the patent, legally, of course. But and when we started, as I mentioned, people didn't think you could do this. They said it was basically impossible. So I wondered if anybody ever wrote that down. So you can do a search. Like now I was in 1982, and there's a way to do what's called a scientific literature search to see who wrote about our work. And I did that, and I found a number of important ones. But I'll just read you this one. This is from 5 of the top polymer chemists in the world in 1979. And what they wrote is, generally the agent to be released is a relatively small molecule with a molecular weight no larger than a few hundred. One would not expect that macromolecules, for example proteins, could be released by such a technique because of their extremely small permeation rates through polymers. However, Folkman and myself have reported some surprising. This word. So that word surprising is a really good word for a patent examiner. And then he continues, the results that clearly demonstrate the opposite. So I showed that to the head of the hospital and the lawyers, and they said, oh, we didn't know that. They flew down to Washington to see the patent examiner, and they showed him that, and he said, gee, I had no idea. He said, I tell you what, I will allow this patent if Dr. Langer can get written affidavits from each of these 5 people that they really wrote this. So that written affidavit is like a document that says they really wrote it. And with that, we got this very broad patent, and with that, we would license this to companies, and I got involved in starting companies with my students. Here's one example where Enzatech, where we just started really right out of the lab with 4 students. But today, that company has 25 products that are FDA approved or in clinical trials. It's led to new treatments for millions of patients that have schizophrenia, but also alcoholism, narcotic addiction, and type 2 diabetes. There's over 2,000 people in the company now, and if from a market capitalization, it's about $6 billion. So that's how we got started, but we kept doing it. We'd make other findings in the laboratory. A few years later, we worked out a way for the first time to sequence molecules that are called polysaccharides. These are also could be drugs like heparin, which is a very widely used blood thinner. So we started this company again with our students, and this was a company called Momenta. Ram and Ganesh were two of my students. It was initially funded by Polaris, a venture capital firm, but then it went public in 2004. And the way sometimes the biotechnology is incredibly expensive, so the way you sometimes finance it is that you actually do deals with different companies. But the beauty of these companies is that you can sort of have different assets. They're what I'll call platform companies. So there are many, many drugs you could create. And so here over time, the company could get financed by deals with different companies like Novartis, Baxter, Mylan, and CSL. But the consequence of this is even though this was a tiny company, there was a drug called Lovenox. Lovenox was a $4 billion drug a year, US dollars. And as it was going off patent, a lot of very large companies wanted to make it, but it was very complicated because these polysaccharides are really big molecules, and nobody had worked out a way to sequence it other than us, and we had also patents on it. So even though there were many bigger companies, we were able to get it was the first biogeneric approved by the FDA. It was also the first complex drug ever approved based on analytic data, and it was the largest syringe launch in history. And then we did it again with Copaxone, which is a drug to treat multiple sclerosis. Here's a picture of the drug. And when that happened, of course, the company did quite well. But I wanted to also tell you another story, and that is about this. So heparin, of course, as I mentioned, is widely used, and it's used in many surgical operations. But in 2008, a very bad thing happened. In 2008, all of a sudden, what you'd see in various headlines is that there were problems of heparin in different places in China, which was doing the manufacturing. And what would happen as you go down these different headlines is hundreds and hundreds of deaths would occur, and they'd occurred in over 22 countries. And that's just was reported. So I, at one point, was head of the FDA, chairman of the FDA's science board. That was their highest advisory board, and they asked me, could we help? So what we did, and this was pretty unprecedented, there were 4 groups: MIT, which was our group, along with Ram Sasakaran, who was one of my students, Momenta, which was our company, and then the FDA and the CDC, Center for Disease Control. And what was done is to publish these papers. This bottom one showed what the contaminant was, and the 2 top ones in the New England Journal of Medicine provided guidelines for how this happened and how to prevent it from happening. And after this, there were no more deaths. The third example I wanted to give is almost of an accidental finding. What we were doing is I was working with Klaus Jensen, who was one of my colleagues at MIT, and we were just doing really basic research about how to insert different things in a cell. And so what happened is that we were, there are different ways that people insert things in cells. One is electricity. One is what's called the cell-penetrating peptide, which pokes holes in a cell, and the others are nanoparticles. And but each of those has problems. You can have damage and toxicity. You can modify things. You can get what's called off-target effects. So they all create problems. What we started doing was studying how does the cell, how can you insert with like a gene gun? It was, like I say, just basic research. How can you insert things into a cell with this gene gun? And we wanted to position the cell right underneath that gun. And what my colleague Klaus, he does a lot of what's called microfluidics. So I'm going to show you a video where we're going to pass a cell right through a little constriction under a gene gun. And you could see the cell going through. That's right in the center. Now you see the cell going through. The gene gun is the thing on the top. And then my student, Arman Shari, did an interesting thing. He took the gene gun away, and he got exactly the same result. What does that mean? Well, to us, what it meant was that going through that constriction, squeezing the cell, worked as well as anything else. So what we did is we built a little system where you could actually make thousands of these and little channels, and you could do 1,000,000 cells a second. This was actually from a paper, but now actually we can do billion cells a second. And just to show an example of what we did, what you can do as a proof of principle, there's a way to make you may have heard of stem cells. This is a cell that you can make almost any tissue out of. And there are, Yamanaka in Japan showed that you could take these 4 factors, and if you could insert them into a cell, a regular cell, it would become like a stem cell. So we looked at different ways of doing it. And if you look at that cell-penetrating peptide, you get 2 colonies, nucleofection, which is electricity, and that's actually the gold standard, is 11, but ours actually got 150, so it was much better. And I'm just gonna, and then what happened is, it's also much safer. So in 2014, Scientific American came out with their top 10 most biggest advances, and the number 1 they called CRISPR-Cas9. People may have heard of that. That's a way to edit genes, whereas this was number 2. I actually felt they got the order wrong, but it's okay. And so anyhow, Arman, who was my student, he wanted to start a company on this so he could get it to patients. So we started a company called Squeeze. And again, we started with venture capital. But today, that company, just about 3 years later, has 100 employees. And what was particularly exciting is that, again, I mentioned the way these companies often get financed is with that when you just start them, is both a combination of venture capital, but also deals with large companies. And Huffman LaRoche, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, made a deal with the company for $1 billion. And the idea of this deal is, I don't know if people have heard of what are called CAR T cells, but this is a new way to treat cancer. And the way it works is people have taken an immune cell. There's 2 types of immune cells, a T cell, and they engineer it by usually doing things like electricity, electroporation, and they engineer it in such a way that it's hopefully killing the tumor, but it can also be incredibly toxic. What Roche wants to do is, asked us to do, is see if we could take the other immune cell type, which is called the B cell, and engineer that to kill the cancer. But there are really many applications for this. This fundamentally changes the way a cell works. You can really insert anything you want into any cell and make a new therapy out of it. Well, I realize everything I've talked about so far has been medical and biological, but I thought I would give you one other example, which is very different. So we've gotten a lot of money from venture capitalists over the years, billions of dollars. And one day, one of the venture capitalists, who actually was one of my former students also, said, Bob, we've given you all this money for medicine, but we want you to help us start a hair company. I said, well, what do you have in mind? They said, well, a lot of people have frizzy hair, and we started this company called Living Proof. And here you see pictures of somebody sort of with frizzy hair. So I should tell you, what is the state of the art when we started this of frizzy hair? Well, you know that everybody, there's probably about 50 to 100 companies that have tried to stop frizzy hair. And they've all tried to do it the same way. They basically used different oils, and in particular silicone oil. Now, that has some problems because it doesn't control humidity, it's oily and greasy and things like that. But the thing is that you might ask, well, what is the thinking behind using silicones? And the reason people use them is, and I'll go into this a little bit more in a second, is that the thing that causes is usually the thing that causes frizzy hair is you go out in a humid environment and it causes the hair to be frizzy. So silicone has what we call, it's like an oil, it's somewhat what we call hydrophobic, it's water repellent, makes it harder for the water to get in. And what all those companies have done is they basically use that as the ingredient, and they just formulated it in slightly different ways. So the only problem is it doesn't work really well. So as I said, what we do as scientists is we try to understand the fundamental problem. So what is the fundamental problem with frizz? Well, it's humidity. And so the question is, how well do silicones fight humidity? And here you see a graph with silicone and without, and you see it doesn't do it very well. So we took a much more fundamental approach. We said, if you're going to keep moisture out, you have to have something that's incredibly water repellent. So I will ask a quiz of you. What is the most water repellent thing you can think of? Any ideas? Well, I'll help. What's that? Vaseline? Okay, well that's water repellent. But we wanted something even more water repellent. And the most water repellent thing we could think of as chemists was a Teflon frying pan. Now, probably you wouldn't want to put a Teflon frying pan in your hair. But what you could do is you could look at what is the chemistry of Teflon. And it's what's called a polyfluoroester. And so what we asked the next question is there anything medically that's ever been made out of polyfluoroester? And as we looked at this, we found that certain ocular lenses are coated with this and put in the body. So we actually took those molecules and tested them, and it works a lot better than the silicones, as you can see on this graph. So we actually then used this polyfluoroester, we made all these products called Living Proof. And I thought I just, and this has been on television, so I thought I would just show you a video of this on television on the next slide.
Where better to seek out today's leading edge of invention? It's a complete no-brainer. MIT.
We've done a lot of work on new kinds of implants to treat brain cancer, to treat different kinds of cancer and other diseases.
Bob Langer and Dan Anderson run one of the biggest academic research labs in the country. Langer alone has over 750 medical patents, more than anyone in the world. He and Anderson have had amazing success inventing novel medical materials and life-saving therapeutics.
Well, certainly it's one of the reasons I really like my job. I mean, you really feel like the work you're doing on a day-to-day is not only scientifically interesting, but also can have a real impact on people's lives.
Now, their work on stem cells and damaged spinal cords has had to make way for another vexing problem. Bad hair days. The result? No frizz. Based on Anderson and Langer's science, no frizz has taken the beauty world by storm.
It's so amazing that the big companies haven't been able to solve these problems in such a short time. We've been able to really tackle problems that have really dramatically affected women for many years.
Rob Robillard is CEO of Living Proof, makers of No Frizz. This Cambridge startup's secret weapon, science. Using renowned researchers from outside the beauty industry to apply new thinking to age-old problems.
This side of her head was treated with one of those silicone products. This side was styled with no frizz technology.
Okay. We found the holy grail for frizz. It's fiber.
For Langer and Anderson, there's nothing trivial about their work for a beauty product. After all, they consider themselves equal opportunity problem solvers.
Do your fellow professors tease you sometimes about the frizzies, or they have a fun with it, or they?
A lot of them use it. So at any rate, that was the first set of products, and then they said, well, could we come up with something that could give hair more body? And Dan and I had also synthesized what we call polymer libraries. We had patents on this, where we had different polymer families, and you could have these libraries, and we screened through these, and we found ones that could give hair more body, and here's an example of that. That's called Full. But one of the things I learned is, you know, if you do something in the medical area and you have really good data and you have FDA approval, that's key, and you'll end up doing very, very well. But in the cosmetics business, I would get a harder lesson. So what happened is you know, so I'm a scientist, but the company, they hired a very smart woman, Grace Ray, who was a Harvard Business School graduate, and as vice president of marketing. She later became CEO. And she did this analysis. She said, well, 95% of the people who use it like it, 95% of the people who use it will reuse it, and way less than 1% know it exists. So what they did is that the business people, the company said, well, we need to get somebody involved, in addition to scientists like me, who the world will, you know, recognize and think highly of. So they got this young woman involved. And she, that's me and her, and she certainly helped. So anyhow, this ended up being very successful. We sold it to Unilever a couple of years ago. And actually, as a spin-off, we also invented this cream that you could put on, another cream that gets rid of wrinkles. It lasts for about 24 hours. And this is just a quick picture of, and you see that the one eye is before and the other's after. And we had the spin-off company that we actually sold to Shiseido, a large Japanese company. So these are just some examples. These are 4 examples, but just to put our list on, we've, out of the lab, and it's all been from basic science, but we've patented a lot of this. We have about 1,350 patents. Some are, you know, many are in medicine, but some are in the food area. Some are in creating new tissues and organs. Like spinal cord. Some are in nanotechnology to create ultra-fast diagnostics. Just to show, if you go to 2011, I wanted to also highlight Moderna. This is, I think, a very exciting example of a whole new class of medicines. But the reason I also wanted to highlight it from a business standpoint, we took Moderna public in December. It was the largest biotech IPO in history. And the company, even though, and it also illustrates another point, the company doesn't have any products yet, but it's still valued at close to $9 billion because people realize that this kind of technology really could change the future. It can lead to new cancer treatments, new heart disease treatments, new treatments for many diseases. And that's one of the exciting things about the medical area, that you really can change the future and save a lot of lives and improve a lot of lives. So this is what I wanted to share with you today, you know, and some of the lessons I've learned. You know, some of it have been through a lot of failures, but you learn by going through this about some of the things that might be helpful and might not. So thank you so much for having me today, and I wish you the best of luck. So I guess I'm supposed to, are there any questions? If there's any questions on anything, I'd be happy to try to answer some. Maybe they're not. It's okay. Yes. I think is there a microphone?
I thank you for your fruitful talk. I want to ask you about what is your advice to our universities here in the Gulf area, how to make the university as productive for startups and companies as you had done in the MIT or others.
Well, I think that's a great question, and I'm very glad you asked it. So I'm a big believer that innovation, in many cases for these startups, the universities can play a very major role. And the 2 great examples of that are in the United States are MIT and Stanford. And it's been interesting to me that startups, even though there are many bigger cities in the United States like New York and others, that those 2 areas have been by far the most successful. So when I look at what has made those 2 universities, what's been important? Well, one, I think most people would say MIT and Stanford are extremely good. They have had a lot of funding, and they've been able to attract a lot of great professors. So my number 1 piece of advice is whatever the government can do, whatever anybody can do, is to just make the universities here as good as possible. Try to give them more funding, and things like that. I think the second thing that I would say that those two universities share are, if you look at the rankings, usually they're ranked number 1 and 2 in the world in engineering, MIT being one. But so I think getting an engineering culture in that university also can be very, very important, because the engineering culture is much more translational than just doing basic science. I think there's a lot of other things that can be done too, but those two I would put at the top of my list. MIT, for example, like a lot of schools in the United States, sports is the most important thing, like football or basketball. At MIT, what they have is this 100K competition, which is not that expensive, $100,000 to the best team that comes up with the best business plan. And so there are things that can be done along those lines that can also be helpful. And by the way, I think there's no harm in copying colleges and universities around the world that do these things well. And it's not to say that they do them perfectly. So I always feel at MIT we can learn from Stanford. Stanford comes to see us too. And I think doing what MIT and Stanford have done, to me, would be a good starting point for here or anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Langer. It's time now for a very exciting fireside chat, the entrepreneurial journey, with Jeff Hoffman, founder of Priceline.com, entrepreneur, Hollywood film producer, producer of a Grammy-winning jazz album, executive producer of an Emmy Award-winning TV show, author, and speaker. Along with Khalil Al-Shaf'i, CEO and Managing Director of Aramco's entrepreneurship venture, WIDE. Please welcome them on stage.
Too high tech for us, isn't it? There was a button that said on. We're just going to do a little fireside chat here and then hopefully get some questions from you guys. But first of all, I do want to say this is not my first trip to Bahrain. I've come here before. I was here last year working with a lot of entrepreneurs and meeting with them. Earlier today, I was over at one of the accelerators talking to entrepreneurs. Tomorrow, I'll do that at the university. I will tell you, for me personally, having visited probably 100 countries to look at entrepreneurship, you guys are doing a really good job here. The government's behind it, industry's behind it. There's a lot of excited youth. So it's really exciting to see the level of entrepreneurship here in this country. So I just want to say congratulations to everybody here for the great job you're doing supporting entrepreneurs.
Great, Jeff. First thing, I watch your videos, and you never had a necktie on.
No.
So I came without a necktie just to be in the same. But you tricked me into it.
I put mine on out of respect for the governor. How's that?
Thanks. Well, let me talk a little bit about WIDE. WIDE is a subsidiary of Saudi Aramco. We invest in startup companies in all sectors, including the energy and fintech and entertainment and sport and robotics, artificial intelligence. So to date, we invested in 117 companies, but we are not a typical venture capital because we also do incubators and accelerators and training and share services as well.
So let's talk about why entrepreneurship is so important, and that's a discussion that we were having earlier today. Entrepreneurs grow economies, and when economies and ecosystems realize that and support them, they create jobs, they innovate, right? They move the economy. They even do something that people don't always think of, which is they actually wind up getting countries on the map quite a bit, right? Estonia did not miss the chance to tell everybody that Skype was created by an Estonian. And I was in Finland, and I was doing a press conference, and I announced that Finland was changing the flag of their country to add a red bird on it because some young Finnish game designers invented Angry Birds. Now, they didn't really change their flag. I was joking, but when innovation and startups come out of a country, it also helps put a country on the map. People look at it and say, wow, they're doing amazing things there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on why are you guys supporting entrepreneurship and why do you have this venture?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you look at small and medium enterprises. It is basically the backbone of any economy. And in the Middle East, especially like in Saudi Arabia, and I'm sure in Bahrain, oil industry, where they're basically the backbone. So there isn't as much as seen in the small and medium enterprises really growing and supporting the economy. So this part of our 2030 vision is really to support these SMEs and to build the economy under with a completely new direction. That's a major driver behind forming WIDE and also the government stimulus package for entrepreneurs as well. So.
Sure. So let's talk about sort of regional cooperation as well. Sometimes entrepreneurs tell me, well, at 1.5 million population here, we're a small market. But the good news is you can create a product, you can prove that it works. It's an advantage to have a small market when you launch. You create your product, you test it here in Bahrain, you prove that it works, and then you go to the region, and then you can go global with the product. But it's nice to have a market where you can prove that your product works. Are you working with companies all over the region?
Yeah, that's what brings me to the ecosystem. Like when we talk about a product and take it from an idea to a commercial and to really expand internationally, that's where the ecosystem comes into play. And the region is very green when it comes to the ecosystem. We don't have like the talents and the advisory and the founders and the venture capitalists like you see in Silicon Valley or in any other country. So part of the challenge we have seen is the lack of a mature ecosystem. So one of the things we're trying to do is when we looked at the market and what everybody is doing, so one of the initiatives we're starting with is looking at starting up what we call a startup university. So we kind of bring all these aspects under one umbrella and have it more structured under this umbrella, so you graduate with a company, not a degree.
That's fantastic. That is kind of the new model all around the world. In fact, I see some young people here today, and we definitely want to talk to you because we want you to understand that entrepreneurship is not just about business or money. In fact, I don't actually even like the word entrepreneurship anymore because so many times around the world, I ask people, do you want to be an entrepreneur? And you know what they tell me? They say, I don't really have an idea for an app. And I say, wait, who said anything about apps? And they say, I don't know how to build websites. It gets associated with tech too much, right? Bob just showed you, a whole field in the bio side of the business, not the e-commerce side of the business. But entrepreneurship is something bigger that we want you to understand. And the words I like to use are self-determination. Entrepreneurship is the chance for you to design the future of this country, of the region, and to design your own life. Right? That's the beauty of being an entrepreneur is instead of waiting for the future, you're designing it. That's a really cool place to be. So we want more people to become entrepreneurs because we want you to envision 2030 for the country and for yourselves, and then we want you to go build it. So talk about sort of how your programs scale from older to younger entrepreneurs as well.
Right now, for example, our program consists actually two parts. We do what we call the venture capital standard, investing in younger generation with more risky ideas. And then for what I want to call older generation, we have what we call debt financing. And these are people who are in the industry, they have been there even as executive or as employees, and they want to leave that company they're in and starting their own manufacturing industries. We invest in this one as well. So kind of like have like this kind of broad over these, I would call it age factor from different entities. But the thing is, we always try to emphasize, entrepreneurship is not easy. It's hard work. So the question to you, Jeff, why we always say 90% of them fail? With all the knowledge we have, and you guys acknowledge, still they say 90% of the entrepreneur startup fails, even in Silicon Valley. Why is that, and what could be done to really reduce that kind of percentage?
Sure. So I'm glad you asked that. First of all, failing is not bad, because if you never fail, it's probably because you didn't try very hard, right? Innovators push the envelope, right? They're pushing and they're trying things, and they're trying things no one's ever tried before that we don't know if they're going to work. So a lot of times they don't work. So if we're not seeing any failure, it means we're not taking any risks, and that's not good. But one of the reasons, so I'm on the board of the Global Entrepreneurship Network. And obviously we are here in town with our Global Entrepreneurship Congress, that we have entrepreneurial ecosystems from 170 countries here in Bahrain right now. And the importance of that is that we fundamentally believe that ecosystem is one of the keys to the question you asked. What is going to improve the success rate of entrepreneurs? And the answer is to make sure they're not in it alone, right? When I started, by the way, there was, and I'm sure Bob could probably agree, entrepreneurship wasn't really a thing, right? When people said, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm an entrepreneur." And they said, "Oh, you lost your job?" I said, "No, I didn't lose my job. This is my job." And they said, "Oh, you can't get another one?" I said, "This is my job." And somebody said to me, "Oh, I understand." I said, "What do you understand?" They said, "You're a hustler." I said, "Well, that sounds bad, right? I hustle, but I'm not on the black market. I'm actually building things and solving problems." And the way that the society around entrepreneurs was, I'll just tell you this quickly. I was building a company, and in the fall, my stepfather came and he said, "What are you working on?" This was like in October, and I showed him. And in December, we sold the company. So in February, he came back again and said, "What are you working on?" And I showed him. And he said, "Wait, I just asked you a few months ago and you were doing something else." And I said, "Yes, sir, I sold the company and started another one." And you know what he said to me? He said, "This is going to look really bad on your resume." He said, "You look unstable." I said, "Because I keep starting companies and people keep buying them?" He said, "Yes, you look like an unstable employee." So that's the environment that we grew up in. Now, what we've realized is ecosystem, and I want you to talk about what you guys do there. Ecosystem, the more people surrounding an entrepreneur, from investors, right, to universities, education, to governments, making it easier to start a business, and to mentorship. Everybody in the community helping an entrepreneur succeed is going to increase that success rate. So I'd love to hear your take on ecosystems.
Sure. When I took over this job, one thing we did, we looked at the ecosystem from what we call it, what the incubators going around in the region. And what we find out, like everybody say, "I have an ecosystem." We go to university, they say, "I have an ecosystem." But what we find out, what actually it is, after analyzing what they have been doing, what everybody has is an aquarium. Not connected. Like everybody has his own fish, and he doesn't have any clue what other people are doing. So we started an innovation ecosystem society. So we brought everybody together. We started with the 10 people. Now we are at 450. Wow. And the members are regional. We have from Bahrain, from Kuwait, from Dubai, from all over Saudi Arabia, and anyone else is willing to be a member. And what we did with the membership, we start looking at the quality of these members and start lining up as advisors and mentors. So right now we are kind of in the process of developing a system that our entrepreneurs can tap into it and select in which area they need help, and they just kind of schedule a meeting with that mentor.
I think that's fantastic. So let's talk about that for a minute, because in the media, when the media says, what is the thing that startups and SMEs need most to grow? Do you know what answer people always give? Funding. They always say money, but it's not the truth. The truth is mentorship. If I give a lot of money to people who aren't very smart, my money goes away and nothing gets done. If I give a little bit of money to people that are really passionate and driven and well-guided, they will do amazing things. In fact, well-trained and mentored people with a little bit of money, they innovate. They just find a way to get it done. So while financing is important, the single most important thing you can provide to an entrepreneur is mentorship. And I want to say one more thing about that, which is that a lot of times I talk to people in a room like this, and people say, Jeff, I'm not an entrepreneur. I run a family business. I didn't start it. And so they think they can't be a mentor, and you're wrong. Everybody in this room can be a mentor. If you worked for a large company, if you worked for Aramco, right, for your whole career, and let's just say you were in human resources, guess what we don't know how to do as startups? I'm an engineer, right? When we were building a company like our company, Priceline in the US, but it's Booking.com here. Well, it's booking in 200 countries now. When you're building a company like that, guess what you have to do? You have to hire people. None of us knew, we weren't HR people, we were engineers. Somebody in this room works for a big company or a bank and knows HR and can be a mentor. So don't rule yourself out as a mentor because you're not an entrepreneur. What you are is an expert in something that we need your help with.
I agree with that. And let me add this. What we heard from Bob earlier, a lot of people is going to tell you you're not going to succeed. A lot of people is going to put all these barriers in front of you. And I mean, in Saudi Arabia, if you graduated from Stanford and you have a degree from MIT and you didn't work for Aramco, your parents think you are a failure. So it's the companies, the problem is that a lot of these big companies also take the talents out of the market comparing to what you see in the US. But again, the reason is a lot of, even the family tell you you're not going to fail. I mean, you're going to fail, this is not, you go and get a job, it's secure, which is kind of true actually. If, on statistically, people who get jobs, they are more secure in long term than people who are entrepreneurs. But that's why the entrepreneurs is kind of, I would say, kind of a different brand. Like you need to have that drive in you to fight all these negativity around you and do what you think you enjoy doing, you love doing, and there is a need for it in the market.
You know, we always tell entrepreneurs, there's no right or wrong. You can go work for a large company your whole life. There's nothing right or wrong. It's DNA, right? What is your DNA? And there is I have this on my wall, and it says, being an entrepreneur is like jumping off a mountain and trying to build an airplane on the way down, okay? That's what entrepreneurs do. And if that scares you, then don't be an entrepreneur. But if that excites you, then you're in the right place. Everybody's not an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs have the DNA that they want to try something new. When you jump off a mountain and you don't know what's going to happen next, some people get excited every day waking up by that, and some people don't, and that's okay. We need some of both of those. In fact, I was talking earlier over at C5 about the fact that some of the people that work for me at my startups are nothing like me at all, because I would probably be dead without them. I would jump off every mountain and kill myself, but I have people that say, Jeff, wrong mountain, wrong place, or that say, I'm going to give you a parachute because I know you'll never think of that. It takes a mix of people to build a company, but in the entrepreneuring space, the leader has to have that sort of DNA, right, that risk averse.
Right. Would you like to open the floor for?
Yeah, let's do that because we don't have a lot of time. We would love to take any questions, especially if there's any entrepreneurs in the audience. Does anybody have any questions for us? I see some hands in the back. Is there a mic back there? On the way.
Yes, good evening. Very insightful talk. I'd like to comment on what Mr. Jeff said. I think it's very important to emphasize on, you said that you're an engineer, and I'd just like to emphasize on a little point. I won't take too long, but I mean this in the nicest way, but entrepreneurs can be the biggest idiots in the world, and they have the most successful businesses. You don't have to be smart at anything. You just have to know how to delegate, and I love how you kind of connected that with your work. About, you said how you're an engineer, and you mentioned about the Booking.com. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
So you are correct, and the key to success is that you need to surround yourself with people smarter than you. My companies were successful because I went out and found people smarter than me in everything I didn't know how to do. That is the key. I had somebody earlier, a local Bahraini woman here, that said, I have an idea for a company, but I'm not a tech person. And so she never started it. Years, she didn't start it. And so today, I told her, you don't have to be a tech person, you just have to find one. So you are correct that you can't do it alone anyway, right? Not one of Bob's companies was done by one person. They were done because he created teams every time to build the companies. So you're going to need a team anyway. Why don't you find a team of people smarter than you and then get out of the way, right? Really, we call it the servant leadership model. My job is to take care of people that are so much smarter than me that I don't even make them waste their time explaining it to me anymore. I just say, you go do it, what can I do for you? I take care of people, and if you build a place that the smartest people in your industry all want to work and never want to leave, you will be successful.
Good. We have a question here. Hassan?
Good evening to everyone. My name is Shantini. I'm a founder of a fintech company. It was really a very important topic which you are saying. The point which you said, all the entrepreneurs, more than the fund, they want the mentorship. That's rightly said. So as Mr. Khalil was saying, there is a society which has been formed to give the advices or mentorship. So is it possible for Bahrain-based companies also to join in the society? If it is so, what is the procedure to join? Because this is a very important thing. We need mentorship. That's the most important thing. Thank you.
Yes, actually, we have a lot of Bahrainis on our society. We have most of the incubators, C9 and the Bahrain Fab Lab, they're all members. So to be a member, you just, if you give me your business card, and we'll send you the invitation, and you can join us. Okay, Hassan. We have a question here down right straight.
Oh, they have a mic right there. Go ahead.
Can you scream?
That's next.
Okay.
Well, just my name is Johnson. I'm from Bahrain. Two quick notes. I noticed there is a difference between the concept of Priceline.com and Booking.com.
No, it's the same company.
But different concepts, like this is hotels or Priceline, you put prices. Well, that's one point. Are there differences or no differences?
No, there's not any differences anymore. It's one company, and one of the name will go away, I think. It'll all be called Booking probably all over the world soon, but there aren't really differences anymore. It's one company. Do you use it?
Well, I use Booking.com a lot.
Okay.
When I'm in the US, I use Priceline.com.
Okay. You'll find the same things. Any other Booking.com customers in here? Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I've used it before.
You get a discount.
Khalil and Jeff, I run a small bank in Bahrain, and we're trying to convert the bank into more of a technology company than a bank. But one of the most frustrating things we face in this society is that there's a stigma to failure. Arab societies don't know how to fail. There's a shame in failure. And as you said earlier, Jeff, if you don't fail, that means you haven't tried hard enough. I think it was the professor, I'm not sure who said it. So Khalil, you being where you are in this region, how do we change the mindset in our society so that when these young kids try, first of all, we get out of their way and let them do because they're smarter than us. Believe me, I know they're smarter than me. But how do we encourage them to fail, but fail quickly and get up and try something different?
Okay, it's as you said. I mean, our society is very tough on failure, and the whole idea, like when we work with our entrepreneurs, as you said, if fail early and frequently, you don't go and hide in a room by yourself and your team, and you don't talk to anyone. You don't talk to your customers. You don't know who's going to use your product, and you start building this amazing product, as Reid Hoffman said. For the founder of Lincoln, that he said, if you produce a product that has no errors, that means you are too late to the market. and this is the thing is here. So when we work with our young entrepreneurs, we work with them with the idea. We told them, we know you're gonna fail. we're still going to give you the money. So there's no pressure about worrying about failing, because we know 90% of you are going to fail anyway. So the whole idea is even when they fail, we work with them, let them pivot, and go back again and invest with them more. So we like those serial failures, because not doing the same mistake all the time. It's just learning from it, because it's like a ladder. Like you're moving fail number one, fail number two, and then finally you're going to hit the market. The stigma is very difficult. It's very hard to work with the people around you, so you kind of protect them. That's why the idea from the Startup University, so it will be like a more structured system that address the issue that we have in the region, more than that what you see in Silicon Valley or in Cambridge or in University of Texas, like in Austin, where the ecosystem is very mature comparing to ours.
And I want to add one thing to that. The next generation, the millennials, whatever you want to call them, you want to know how to make them angry, call them millennials, because they don't like being called one group. But that generation doesn't feel that way anymore. And you know why? It's the advantage to being the first ever generation raised on social media. And here's why that's different as I go visit young people all over the world. In the past, the only thing, the stories, right, the culture that we were raised with was the culture that was physically in our country, because everybody we knew were people we came in physical contact. In a social media world, you have young people growing up connected to other young people all over the planet. So you know what they're finding out? That what my parents told me wasn't true. That in fact, when you fail, the next day the sun still comes up and everybody still gets up and goes to work and the world doesn't end. So now that they have discovered through social media that there's a lot of people all over the world that fail all the time and nothing bad happens, what they tell me when you guys aren't in the room is they say, we don't believe that anymore. We're okay with failing. So I think the hope is we just had to wait for this generation to come along, and they're going to change that cultural thing about failure. They already are. Like I said, a lot of times they won't say it when you're in the room, but when I'm with the youth alone, they say, we understand all that. We're going to try, and we're probably going to fail, but the sun's going to come up tomorrow, and we're going to be okay. I think that's good news. Do we have time for more? I don't know what our time is.
I have no idea.
Yeah, my name is Abd Hassan Diri from Bahrain Civil Society. Thank you, Jeff and Khalil, for sharing your success journey with us. And it is said that normal people see problems as problems. Only entrepreneurs who can see the problems as opportunities. And I would appreciate if you can share some of your success stories in that. How did you see, or how did you come across some of the problems and transfer those problems as opportunities in your success journey?
All right, I'll give you a short answer.
I think
I'm
Jeff
sure,
will be
I'm sure you
better.
have a lot to say.
Jeff,
No,
Jeff
you'd like
will
you to
be,
too.
because
So-
he's the entrepreneur.
So here's the answer. And again, for anybody in this room that is an entrepreneur or wants to be, the mistake that people make is thinking that the answer is in their office, right? When you're in your office, the world's problems don't come there. And so one of the things that I do is I schedule time to be out of my office, and every other Friday I do this, out in the world somewhere, because the best way to solve a problem is to go live it and to be in it. So my first, especially for the young entrepreneurs, my first startup was I went to an airport, this is long ago, I missed a flight. And I missed a flight because the line was really long. It took 1 hour to get to the front of the line. At the end of the line, the woman just hit print, looked at my ID, and gave me a boarding card, right? A boarding card's a piece of paper that comes off a printer. And I was really upset. I said, wait, we're standing in a line that's 1 hour long so you can hit print? And she said, well, you have to have a boarding card to get on a plane. I said, I understand, but you're using a printer. Why don't we all use a printer? She said, it doesn't work that way. I said, it's about to. And I went home, and my first startup, if you guys have gone to an airport, probably anywhere in the world, and checked yourself in on a kiosk, that was my first invention. We created those kiosks. We got a patent on them for the software, really. And thank you. And now the kiosks are in every airport in the world. But the reason is because I was standing in an airport saying, this is ridiculous. There has to be a better way. So the answer to your question is, go out in the world where the problems are and stand with them. There were two young people, I was in Cairo at the time, Anybody ever try to cross the street in Cairo on foot? You have a roughly 1% chance of living, okay? With the somehow there's 20 million cars in Cairo, and they're all on the street I'm trying to cross on every single day. But I was standing there in traffic with these people, risking my life to cross. We started talking about the traffic, and these two young men wound up creating, I've been mentoring them, they created a product, I can't say the proper Arabic word, but the word is something like Bayalik. But it's one of 60 million people use this traffic app in the Middle East for traffic, and these guys had this idea standing in the middle of all these cars saying, how can we come up with a way to address this problem? Get out of your office, go out in the world, go where the problems are, and stand in the middle of a problem. You will be much better entrepreneur if you're living in a problem than if you're sitting in your office or your house wondering what's going on outside.
My name is Shafkat Ali Mehman. How do you recognize an entrepreneur, and how do you nurture and develop them?
When it comes to entrepreneur, it's not something you recognize. There's something they wanted to do. Like if somebody came to me with a proposal or something, I would see if, like, it's not just a matter of somebody has an idea, it's somebody has the skill to execute the idea. If he has the skill to execute, then we will be working with them. But because everybody thinks he's an entrepreneur, we receive on weekly basis more than 100 ideas in our system. But I would say 95% of them is nothing there, or it is a good idea, but the one who proposing it have no skill to execute. So execution is very important. And the entrepreneur, as Jeff mentioned, is someone who is always looking for a problem, something to solve. So a lot of our entrepreneurs coming, they have specific issues to solve. Like one of our entrepreneurs who work in our incubator, his son has autism. So he sent his son to school, and when he comes home, there is nothing. He doesn't know how to work with him. His mom doesn't know how to work with him. So he started building a game system on iPad to continue the education that the autism kids have in school to continue in the house. And he has been working with the Autism Institute in Dubai, one of the major ones in the area, and also some of the doctors as well. This is the kind of people that you can say they are entrepreneurs.
Do we, I think, are we out of time? Okay. So we want to say, first of all, thank you. Second of all, if you're thinking about being an entrepreneur, do it. And third of all, if and when they fail, because they will, congratulate them for being brave enough to try and tell them to try again tomorrow, okay? Don't tell people that failing is bad. Tell them that the difference between someone failing and everyone else is you were brave enough to try, and everyone else is just sitting there complaining about things and not trying to make it better. Any closing words?
Yeah, I mean, again, thank you for inviting us over here and give us a chance to share something with you and learn from you as well. I think Jeff and I will be around. If any of the people have questions or anything you want to come and talk to us, please feel free. We'll be here. I don't know if you can.
Okay, actually, I am hosting the evening event at the GEC, so I have to go right now. But my email is just jeff@jeffhoffman.com. Easy enough. And I've been here before, and I'll be back again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jeff Hoffman, Mr. Khalil Al-Shafi'i, thank you very much for this inspiring chat. Now, this one should be as inspiring or even more. It's the stickiness of success with Hamid Fakhru, businessman, property developer, inventor, writer, and speaker, founder of the Startup Factory and Hack Arabia. The moderator will be Sinan Khatib, founder of Burrito Loco, Noodle Walk, and Sandwich Guys.
Thank you.
Your mic working?
Yeah, we good?
Yeah.
Can you hear me in the back?
I think they're good, yeah. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Switching gears a little bit this evening, me and Hamid are here to talk about the philosophy of success and some of the different ways of looking at what does it mean to be successful. Sometimes in the entrepreneurial game, you're constantly feeling like you're in a rat race, and we thought it would be a great opportunity to speak to Hamid today about some of his perspectives on what is success, how to achieve success, and to get some of his insights. So I'm quite delighted today to have the opportunity to speak with him. Thank you for joining us today, Hamid.
Thank you.
So just to get things kick-started, I'm interested to know, what does success mean to you?
First of all, I understand that we're very tight on time, short on time, so we're going to try to make this as quick and as painless as possible for everyone here. Now, the definition of success is basically to achieve a certain goal or objective that you have in mind. That's the Wikipedia definition. Everyone has their own imagination or concept of success. So to someone it might be wealth, to someone it might be health. You might find a patient and all they want to do is just to survive and to live. You might find someone that's working in the corporate world. Unfortunately, the guys left. I would have directed this at them. They want to make billions and they want to get high returns on their investment. So to me, success changed. It evolved over my life. When I was young, I wanted to make 1,000 dinars a month, and I would be happy with that. And then I wanted to make 2,000, and then I wanted to make 3, and the number kept changing. And then I wanted a car, and then I wanted 2, and then I wanted 3, and it never stopped. And that's why the title, The Stickiness of Success, came into play, because your goals keep expanding and your dreams keep growing. And my definition changed when I got sick, as you know. I had cancer about 7 or 8 years ago. And in that time, my success was to stay alive. I had chemotherapy, I had radiotherapy, I had a box full of medicines, and it was me and my TV and my bed. And that gave me so much time to think. So every day I was just hanging out with death, wondering if I'd see the next day. So all I wanted to really do was to live. And that was success to me. Today, my definition again has changed. I think after fulfilling the basic pyramid of life, which is, security, accommodation, food, then you start reaching aspirational goals, self-fulfillment, giving back to society. My success today is waking up and being happy at the man I see in the mirror, and going to sleep easily. No burdens, no guilt, no worry, and no stress. And it's always a hard balance to reach still. As a primate, my brain keeps playing tricks on me.
All of us.
Yeah. So I try to keep things sort of go with the flow and not really worry about what's coming and what's facing me. Because end of the day, by the way, we're just a tiny blip in the universe and the cosmic time of, 14 billion years? We've existed for 2 million years. We've actually reached enlightenment 10,000 years ago. If you want to be generous, 20,000 years ago. And my short existence is not really going to mean anything in the cosmic nature of things. So just enjoy the moment, do good, and that's my success for now.
So you had a pretty significant moment in your life where you used to live your life one way, and then something tragic happened through the illness that changed your perspective.
Right.
What's the advice today that you would have given the older version of yourself, right? Because now you have the privilege of hindsight and looking back.
Right.
For example, there could be an entrepreneur sitting in the audience today working really hard and trying to accelerate and grow. what perspective would you add to what he's doing that sometimes a tragic event might bring to your attention, and how to avoid waiting for that tragic event? What to do from now to maintain perspective always in life?
Well, that's a good question. I think I wouldn't change a thing, first of all, from what I've done, because it brought me exactly to this moment. And I was always a rebel growing up. I always had, I hated going to school. I hated waking up in the morning. I hated listening to my teachers and professors. And I think to a certain degree, everyone here feels the same. I think the defining factor of any entrepreneur is determination. And that fighting spirit is what really gives us success. I mean, success in accomplishing missions, because end of the day, even if you're in a Zen-like state, you need to make money to live, right? So knocking on the door, not giving up is essential. What I would have changed about myself was, man, okay, don't work with your friends and family. Don't borrow money. Ignore what people tell you. Listen to the smart people and what they tell you. I mean, there's so many things that we could change, but without those lessons, I couldn't be giving lessons myself. So, I mean, take the punches, but don't be hard on yourself. I think that's the hardest part. That's the most important part. Don't lose sleep over things that happen to you, and don't cry over spilt milk. I think that's the most important thing, because it happened. Move on and improve, evolve, adapt, overcome.
So taking from some of those messages, there's a big challenge in me, even myself as an entrepreneur and somebody who's built businesses, trying to find a balance between what's the difference between being ambitious and being greedy. Where is the healthy line begin and where does the unhealthy line begin? And trying to navigate between those distinctions. What are some of your thoughts on what you think would be healthy ambition and somebody being extremely motivated versus somebody crossing the line and getting to the point where they're just greedy and obsessed and it becomes a negative thing in one's character?
Okay, so let me take us back 100,000 years. We were living in a savanna. Humanity was trying to survive and thrive. And we're trying to feed ourselves, our family, and our tribe. So what were our essentials? Surviving the wild animals, finding food, and not dying, basically. And that instinct that we had, that desperation to find food, to find a mate, to reproduce, is what made us all get here today. So we have a driving force in us biologically to succeed and to thrive and to grow and to protect our own. So that remains in us today. And we began hoarding, and we didn't realize that there's a certain time when enough is enough. So what's the difference between having 10 billion and having 1 billion, or having 1 billion and having 100 million? You still have a nice house. You still have security. What about the rest of humanity? So when technology came and our life expectancy increased, our technology got better, our communication got better, all of a sudden there was no more culling of the weak. It wasn't survival of the fittest anymore. It's survival of basically everyone. And everyone expects to survive and thrive and to get paid and to grow and thrive. So what stops someone from being greedy? Nothing. And that's, I think, the line that the new generation or the millennials are crossing over into. I'm surprised at the awareness of the new generation environmentally and technologically and through society, how they actually care about each other and care about the environment. We grow up, whatever, throw your trash in the sea. Who cares about a V8 or a V10 engine? throw oil on the ground. And I think luckily technology has given us the awareness to understand the damage that we're doing to the planet. And hopefully it's not too late and it's reversible. I don't think it is. I think we have another 10, 20 years to go, and it's gonna degenerate pretty bad. But we'll find out, won't we?
Yeah. If you were to give advice today to somebody who's working on developing a business and trying to make something successful out of their work, but they're trying to think to themselves, how much should I be optimizing every day? How much should I be obsessing over my business? How much should I be tracking my competition without burning out, without ending up in a negative state of mind? Where is success in that balance?
Another good question. I think the bar remains where you set it for yourself. So you can set a high bar, great. Shoot for the stars and you'll hit the moon. But I think it's dangerous to have too high of an expectation, because when you fall, you get crushed. So I think it's great to have hopes and dreams and aspiration, all of that. But again, it comes back to accepting reality. And there's a saying in Arabic that we spoke about this before. Al-qana'a kanzun la yufna bih. Contentment is a treasure. So I know it's easy to say after I've built myself and gotten here, but I am content, and I'm not trying to go above and beyond, because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. So I think more important than the past or the future is today. So if you do it, great. And I feel that if you enjoy what you're doing, you're going to be so much better at doing it. So if you're under pressure, under stress, you don't sleep, and you're dying the whole time, then what's the point? And it's going to be harder for you to achieve, because the pressure takes away that rational thinking that you usually have. If you're enjoying it and enjoying the journey before the destination, I think you're going to reach the destination and you're going to surpass your goals and expectations.
How do you feel about the impact of social media in the past 10 years, 15 years into our lives, and how intrusive it's become? Is it making it really hard to be able to check out and to actually reach, a higher form of living, greater enlightenment, having a peace of mind and quietness in your head to be able to reflect and get to that point where only after your tragic situation did you get to?
Right.
Do you check out? Do you switch off everything and have those moments now? What would be your advice to the people building businesses today who seem so obsessed with their phones and the moment-to-moment action of their businesses?
Well, I got to admit, I'm a victim of social media myself. I mean, when I check my stats, I spend at least an hour and a half on social media. And I think it's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because we can reach out to each other. It's a curse because it drains our energy and our time. But more importantly, I think if we look at our social media stars and our celebrities, and you look at what people are interested in, it's pretty tragic. We celebrate, stupidity. We celebrate idiocy. We celebrate people with no ideals. I mean, just as an example, the Kardashians. They're the most famous social media celebrities. Kylie or Kendall or whatever. She's a billionaire before the age of 30. And the tragic thing is that people did a GoFundMe to give her 100 million when she was at 900 million so she can hit 1 billion. Do you understand? Like, instead of worrying about the poor or the needy, they're like, let's make a Kardashian a billionaire. So what do you say to something like that? We celebrate athletes. I love athletes and football and all that. But we forget about the brainiacs, we forget about the scientists, we forget about the computer engineers who make everything possible for us. So I think out of all parallel universes, I'm kind of in a good one, but I wish I was in a parallel universe that celebrated intellectualism, science, technology more than, what somebody had for breakfast yesterday.
And how do you feel if we take it more on a micro level and bring it into sort of Bahraini society?
Yeah.
How do you think Bahrain is doing in terms of these points and how we're developing young people and developing the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in terms of building the right values, focusing on the right things? What's your sort of assessment going into that?
Bahrain has a long way to go. We have a lot of obstacles in our educational system. We need to evolve. We need to move away from the traditional thinking. We have other societal issues where people focus again on issues that drain from our time, cultural issues, divisive issues, religious issues even, where we could be spending more time, energy towards enlightening our youth, because without giving them the right tools to create and to be independent and self-sustainable and to be free in their thoughts, we're never going to get anywhere. I had a small project where I wanted to have the schools have a little booth in one of the schools as a pilot, and we teach them, or we allow them to trade during break for half an hour. So if somebody wants to, you know how kids trade stuff and sell stuff and whatever, allow them to sell for half an hour and just let the school supervise it. It will shut down so fast, it will make your head spin. So
what was the reason?
The reason was the parents wouldn't be happy that you're taking advantage of their kids. So there's a black market already. People are selling e-cigarettes to each other. People are saying, so at least if you regulate it, it could be monitored, it could be interesting. So apparently 2 years ago, there was a general order for no sorts of financial transactions in any of the schools. So that kills entrepreneurship. You can't teach kids to think independently and then tell them you can't even sell a magazine or anything like that in class.
And a lot of people might get their first experiences of entrepreneurship by trading things or selling things in their social spheres or in their circles.
That first dinar.
Yeah.
It means everything.
Or you had to convince somebody of something.
Yeah. I remember my first dinar when I got it. I couldn't believe that I actually made money. You know, and that's the feeling that I want to give our youth, so that in the future it becomes something normal. You know, you don't have to be an employee.
So it actually brings me to another aspect of the culture that I wanted to get your opinion on, and trying to determine what's the best path forward for materializing success within the context of building your business, where in some cultures there's some difficulty, for example, in being direct or giving constructive criticism in a direct fashion, which hinders the work. Because the more open the line of communication, the more ability you have to provide criticism, the more quickly you can get to resolution and iteration that adjusts accordingly.
Right.
What are your thoughts on the local culture and its ability to withstand that constructive criticism?
We have a problem in Bahrain and in the Arab world in general, where people don't like saying no to somebody else. They'd rather leave you hanging and ditch you than tell you, no, I don't like your product, I don't like your idea, I don't want to work with you. And I don't know what it is. It's being embarrassed, or it's because we're coming from such, a short acceleration from being primitive to being, what's the word? Like
prosperous.
Yeah, prosperous, or city life or whatever. Urban, right. So we came from an island mentality to an urban sort of mentality. So we consider a lot of things to be rude. And when you bring up a point and you say to somebody, you have to be very careful, because everybody's connected to everybody else, and everybody is friends with somebody else. So if you have a problem with someone, it could spread across. But I think the best policy is being blunt, being straight, being forward. And I think I was lucky to have studied outside Bahrain, so I kind of acquired those traits from the US and from Europe. But that's also something cultural that we definitely need to work on.
And how do you deal with it when you are an entrepreneur and you're trying to get something done?
Yeah.
And you're bumping up against that, and
Yeah.
you're getting into a situation where you feel that somebody might not take kindly to you making sure that you're getting to the bottom of things, and they
Right.
don't want that to happen.
Right.
So in those situations, how much are you supposed to be diplomatic? How much are you supposed to ensure that you're caring more about the work than anybody's feelings? What's the balance there to get the best success rate?
When it comes to work, there's no playing around. You just, if somebody doesn't give me an answer that I want, I barge into their office and I get the answer that I need. So for example, I just had an application being bounced around from ministry to ministry, and nobody would take ownership of my application, and nobody would give me the rejection or the acceptance that I wanted. So I went from the top and I kept going down, down, down until I found the employee who was specifically responsible for my application. And I sat with her and I'm like, what's up? Why aren't you giving me what I need? And she said, 1, 2, 3. And I'm like, okay, I'll give you 1, 2, 3. And I got it. But in the meantime, they pulled my soul out until they gave me the answer that I wanted. And I think that's part of being an entrepreneur, I guess. You need to keep going at it until you get what you want. Otherwise, if you just wait for somebody to answer you, it's never going to happen.
Which also, you have other dimensions of that. For example, if you have employees and you're working with a team or you're working with a group, the question to be asked is, what's more important, to be liked or to be respected, for example. Yes. Another situation where you might bump up into a conflict between trying to be diplomatic and get along with people versus trying to get to the bottom of things or make sure that the ball is moving in the right direction.
Right.
What are your thoughts on the difference between being liked versus being respected, and which one is more important?
Okay. Well, being liked in social circles is obviously important. It's just part of our human traits. But being liked in business, or wanting to be liked in business, I could consider it as a sort of weakness. I think being respected is important, and to a certain degree, possibly even being feared is important. If they don't respect you, they're going to come like wolves. They'll eat you up. Even though we call ourselves, civilized, the business world is not civilized. It's dog eat dog, each man for himself, greed, selfishness. So if you don't fight for that scrap, somebody's going to take it from you. And until we reach enlightenment, or until we reach utopia, and until we reach the part where money really doesn't mean anything, because by the way, money is a social construct. There's no such thing as money. Do you know that 8% of the global currency is in cash? The other 92% is just in computers. I mean, just think about that. They're just numbers in machines. And everybody actually thinks that they have money, and there's no such thing as money. And if the system broke down tomorrow and everything disappears, all these social lines that we've created are gone. And another thing I'd love to add is that, I don't know how we got here, where we respect someone with a lot of money, whether they have brains or not. So we don't evaluate the person. We look at someone, oh, he's rich, oh my God. Okay, then what? You know what I mean? I wish we can reach a level of enlightenment again, where we can respect each other as humans and for our thoughts, not for our looks, not for our wealth, not for our connections, not for anything. But we're not going to get there in my lifetime, or our lifetime. So I guess we're stuck where we are for now.
Well, it seems you have an opportunity at least to shape a little small corner of the universe. You started something called the Startup Factory,
right,
which I'm hoping is going to be a place for you to help develop success within the entrepreneurship community here in Bahrain.
I hope so.
Would love to hear a little bit more about that, and maybe understand a little bit how it's different from some of the others that are currently operating in the country.
Okay. Well, we had our opening last night under the patronage of His Excellency Sheikh Hisham bin Abdurrahman. He was gracious enough to come over, cut the ribbon, and meet the entrepreneurs who gave him a little presentation. So having that sort of support from our leadership and from our community is invaluable. We've identified some talent, 5 out of 40 applicants so far, who I believe have the potential to grow and to export products and services into the rest of the world. And that'll be directly under my mentorship and using my personal connections as well. And I think the difference between the Startup Factory and the other incubators in Bahrain is me. I've built a solid, 12 or 13 companies since I started. I've invented a couple of products. I've learned, I think, most of the hard lessons, although I learn new lessons every day. I've been beat up, I've been hammered, I've been banged by life. So I'm going to allow them to do the same. That's Haya. She's our number 1 in QB. Say hi to Haya, everybody. I'm going to allow them to get beat up, but when I see a wall or a train coming to hit them, I'm going to warn them to take a right or a left. Other than that, they're on their own. They're basically on their own, and we'll give them some basic training: bookkeeping, accounting, marketing, team building, product development, distribution, insurance, all that fun stuff. And that's basically the Startup Factory.
What are some of the big challenges that you see ahead of them in light of the current market conditions, current climate of Bahrain? What are some of the concerns that you have for the startups that you're seeing?
I think they're starting in the worst economic times I've ever seen in our country. I'm sure everybody knows that. No cash flow, no business, no confidence, no oil, and we got a few wars all around us. So I feel bad for them, but I'll tell you what, like a bacteria, if they make it through this, they're going to evolve into being a super bacteria. And inshallah they get there. I don't know. I hope so. I hate to be pessimistic, but it's the truth.
Well, even in the United States, some of the best companies were made during tough times.
Right.
And I think it's to your point that if you're able to survive during difficult times, you'll do fantastic during good times,
Yes.
right? If you're doing reasonably well during good times, that's not necessarily a testament of your good business model.
Correct.
And so, do you have already some folks who've already started with you guys?
We launched yesterday. We're going to do our official signing with everybody on Wednesday.
Okay.
And I really can't wait to get started. Like we did some IQ tests, and we have some actual near geniuses. And more importantly, every one of our incubees so far has been that determined type, the type that doesn't give up, that always has an open mentality, a happy mentality. So to me, there are some qualities that I see. I believe I'm a people person. I see some qualities that are special, and I can't wait to see what they come up with.
And so if anybody wants to get involved, or if there are any entrepreneurs out there that are interested, what's the best way to get a hold?
Well, it's going to start off with an application form on, we have a website, thestartupfactory.online, and please follow us on thestartupfactory.bh. Anyone that has any questions, please feel free to harass Aisha. Where is she? She's here. There she is. Just harass her online, and she'll get back to you.
Do we have time for questions? Or?
I don't think so.
Okay, we need to probably wrap it up. Well, thank you so much, Hamid, for joining us this evening.
Awesome.
It was a delight to have you. Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Hamid Fakhru and Mr. Sinan Khatib, thank you so much. Building more connected and inclusive cities is no longer an option. Please welcome for this fireside chat Miguel Gamino, Executive Vice President, Global Cities at MasterCard, civil technologist and entrepreneur, along with Ali Murtada, Director of Real Estate Investment Development at Bahrain Economic Development Board.
We have the tough job of keeping everybody awake, I think. How many of us are still there? Just checking. I think another surprise is I don't look like my picture. I've evolved. I do this to a lot of my clients. My name is Ali Murtada. I am the head of real estate investment development for the Economic Development Board. So I come from a very traditional real estate background, normal development, cement and mortar. And then over time I realized that tech seems to be everything, the talk of town and actually the solution that we all need. So today, this conversation, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, is probably going to be very, very interesting. Miguel here has a very interesting job. I'm going to let him talk about it, but it's about integrating cities and making sure that they're much more livable than the way they are. Do you want to start talking about what Global City is and what is that initiative?
Okay. So thank you very much for having me. This actually has been my first visit to Bahrain, Manama, and it's been absolutely fantastic. And I'll tell you why for a couple of reasons, as I use that also to kind of describe what we're doing. I have the pleasure of working for MasterCard to build a strategy and relationships to help cities everywhere on the planet. And so that gives me the opportunity to come to wonderful places like Bahrain. And I'll tell you that what is fantastic about that, in addition to my own personal enrichment, frankly, is finding cities that are really thinking about how to activate an ecosystem, the entire community, to make their cities serve the people of those cities better. And so that is what we are very literally working on doing everywhere in the world, is to help the leadership in cities, both the government, the business community, and the enterprise and the startup community, the nonprofit sector, and certainly academia, come together to build improved quality of life for the cities, for the people that live in those cities. We've identified this as a big, not only opportunity, but even responsibility as an organization to participate globally in making cities more livable and making cities accomplish their growth in an inclusive way. A couple of statistics I'll toss out there just to frame kind of the bigger discussion also. Globally, we look at this concept of urbanization that's occurring. And I think that is certainly going to be something that has probably been and will continue to be going through the minds of people like you everywhere in the world as people descend and migrate to cities globally. Right now, more than 50%, so more than half of the world's population lives in urban centers. That is expected to grow north of 70% of people living in urban centers by 2050. And that is also started to be considered to potentially be much higher. The point is that the trajectory is going up, and it's going up very fast, and there's no one that challenges that reality. The other, though, is that cities, and this again is probably another consideration of real estate and property and the stuff that I know that you all are working on, is that cities are also the largest contributor to, we'll call it, the global challenges, including climate change. So more than 70% of global CO2 emissions come from urban centers. Now the good news. The good news is that 80% of the global GDP also comes from urban centers. So at the end of the day, we observe this as the place where people are and where they're continuing to go. It's the place where the world's challenges exist. It's also where the economy and the community of resources exist to try to tackle those challenges, to make those cities more livable for more people who are migrating there. So that's the way I set up how important this really is. I offer also that a city that isn't thinking about those realities and activating the ecosystem of entrepreneurship, activating the ecosystem of enterprise and academia to try to tackle or anticipate and get ahead of those challenges might not be the place that people want to go to, might not be the place that migration is headed if they're not figuring out how to address that. So at MasterCard, we are working with cities, literally hundreds of cities all over the world, who are interested in engaging in partnerships to activate solutions to those real-world challenges. From a personal note, the way I got here, and this discussion this morning or this afternoon has been fascinating because I come from a startup background originally. I was a startup founder 2 times in the early 2000s, and then I got talked into something that resonated with me in the previous 2 discussions. I got talked into doing my civic duty. I did not want to go into public service. I did not truthfully have a very high regard for the effectiveness of government. But I was talked into it. And this is a case where sometimes your mentors know better than you, because what's come of it is I have found myself here in a place where I have the blessing of being purpose-driven, of having a job that pays me well and affords me the opportunity to visit places like this, but also all with an underlying purpose that is much greater than just economic profit. And I'll get into a little more of that in a bit. But during the course of that, I was in charge of technology, effectively, for the cities of El Paso, Texas, a population of about 800,000 or 900,000, metro areas, about 4 million. And then a couple cities that you're more likely to recognize, which is San Francisco, and then ultimately I was the Chief Technology Officer for the city of New York. And when I did that, I realized a new respect for the role of public government, public service, that the decisions, I wanted to say one quick thing, and we can explore maybe later also, is this concept of risk and failure. I can fully respect that might be a cultural discussion in this part of the world. I think that is widely a cultural discussion in governments everywhere in the world. I was literally the head of technology for the city of San Francisco, which is the center of risk-taking. It's the center of failure acceptance. It is the place where what some of the stories were described, those happen and are celebrated. Yet the government was very risk-adverse. And so I think there's something to explore there about that reality and a role that partnerships in the private sector can play in helping governments accept more calculated, appropriate risk, any part of the world. But at the same time, the governments are making decisions that are quite literally sometimes life and death. So sometimes the consequence of failure, what I learned from going from a startup entrepreneur to today, was the risks that I was taking, the consequences of my failures as a startup entrepreneur were mostly money. In the worst case scenario, people lost their jobs, but most often it was just money. The risk of failure in the public sector and local government in particular could literally be people's lives. So I think we have to celebrate entrepreneurship and the risk-taking and the failures. I do agree with that. Government needs to take a bit more of that, but I think the private sector also needs to realize and respect the gravity of the responsibility of the private sector. And through that empathy, I think we can find progress.
I definitely agree with that. I think the failure in the government sector or public versus private sector seems to have its own set of consequences. I want to swing the conversation back to the global cities topic and how did MasterCard get involved in this? What is MasterCard actually offering? Does the concept or the model of a chief technical officer for a city work for our part of the world?
So MasterCard got into the cities business, I think, after as a consequence of a series of really important, thoughtful, strategic decisions. There was a decision sometime back that we would be focused on the realities of economic growth and promoting it, but ensuring that it occurs, or doing everything we could to ensure that it occurred inclusively. That not only would we gain as an organization, but society would likely gain if we found ways to help make sure that growth happened inclusively. So we did a couple of things. We identified we committed that we would bring 500 million people into the digital financial world. We are somewhere north of 300 million that have been achieved, have been reached, and brought into the formal economy. So we're doing well to accomplish that goal. Also, 400 million small businesses. And we committed $500 million to inclusive growth studies and initiatives. So the company kind of early identified generally that inclusive growth was something we should invest in for the purpose of doing well by doing good. Now that then further led to specific thinking about cities. For all the reasons I previously mentioned about the cities are the reality for where people are going, where the problems are, where the economy is, and the opportunity, etc. And so cities became a manifestation of how we could even accelerate that inclusive growth strategy even further. So we are focused on helping cities overall achieve better quality of life for the people that live there, for their residents and their visitors. We're doing that by helping cities achieve efficiencies and economic growth, but to do both in an inclusive manner. And so we are organizing cities around the world. We're reaching hundreds of cities around the world to come together to accelerate that outcome through collaboration. We believe that if cities connect with each other, then they're going to find ways to accelerate that progress. And to your last question about does a CTO, a Chief Technology Officer, work for cities, whether this part of the world or any, everywhere in the world they've got someone thinking about the impact positively or negatively that could or should or would occur in their cities by technology. Sometimes they call them CIOs, sometimes they call them CTOs, sometimes it's the deputy mayor or minister of technology and innovation. The truth is, I don't care what you call it, the future of every industry, including local government, is going to be impacted by technology. If you, just like most things, if you take a proactive approach to that, if you make the technology work for you, you make technology work in particular for people, then I think you will mobilize a positive outcome through technology. So I think it is important to have somebody thinking about that reality and managing the way that technology comes to life in your city, no matter what job title that you might give them.
I think I'm still a little bit concerned about the generic conversation. Maybe if you could give some examples of how, be it Global Cities Initiative or MasterCard's initiative directly, have helped improve, let's say, the livability of the city, the linkages between New York, for example, and other cities, and so forth. So we get a bit more practical examples of how maybe some of this would actually affect or touch people's lives.
Yeah, so one thing we did was, so we created a partnership of cities called City Possible. And through that, we currently have almost 30 cities actually signed up as part of this organization. And that organization brings these cities together and activates their discussion. And they identify their common challenges. And through that process, in a very specific example, we had a concern raised by the city of Dublin, Ireland, that said, we are concerned with the feedback we're getting or the notion of economic impact on our local businesses by a few things. It could be things we can't control, like weather. It could be things we can control, like events that we approve or plan, or even policies that we make. But people, small businesses along a corridor or in a particular part of the city, they might feel that the impact is different. So they might think that by making a street pedestrian only, that their business has been negatively impacted because less people, they feel less activity up and down the street. But we have the power to bring data to play to show the actual impact. And so while it may feel like there's less activity, the truth is people on their feet buy things from stores, people in their cars drive by stores. And so you could take a perception and help the government surface the reality. And all of a sudden, the small business owners understood that it was actually a positive impact when they might have felt it was a negative impact. And then the power of the City Possible Network, or the global network, is to take that solution that we helped build for the city of Dublin, and then when we come and visit another city who expresses the same concern, we're not starting over. We're referring them to the success already had in another city, and we're bringing that solution forward. So the whole concept is you identify a problem that is common, which most problems are common across cities. You solve it once with the city at the table, and then you share that solution across multiple cities. So you build it once and replicate. No different than the startup entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurs that were on this stage before us. That is effectively their business model. Being maybe the startup DNA in me is coming out, in that we want to build a solution with a city once, informed by the customer, informed by the user, to use startup terms, but do it in a way that we can then scale it to everyone else in the world very, very quickly.
So, in the interest of time, I would like to ask one final question, maybe see if there's anything in the crowd. I've always had this challenge with the developers and the city builders of the region. To them, it's about a feasibility study, a concept, and then taking some shortcuts from municipality approvals, et cetera, and trying to make sure you put up a building that usually in the long run is devastating to the overall environment. So how important do you think it is, from your experience across learning from 30 cities, is building that sustainability mindset, an eco-friendly mindset into the design? How important is that for cities and nations?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think, listen, I'm a technologist, so I love it when people ask me to tell them what's technology going to look like in 10 years, or what's technology going to, what's the world going to be, how's the world going to be shaped by technology in 30 years? I'm lucky if I can tell you what it'll look like in 3 years, much less 30. So someone in the built environment world, right, architects and urban planners, I think have a very challenging job, because they are building things by design to last hundreds of years without any ability to predict where they go into the future. So I think the lesson that I have seen cities start to adopt more and more is building flexibility, building the ability to flex later into the plans from the beginning. So whether that's modular designs or flexible designs, and again, I'm not an architect, so I'm not going to pretend to speak to that, but ultimately kind of recognizing that you can't build something that is going to be rigid forever if you expect it to be able to thrive or adapt in the future. And so I think that's a challenge, but it's also the opportunity to leverage this power of collaboration, because different things are advancing at different paces around the world. So I often get a question, which is, Miguel, you talk to hundreds of cities around the world, all of them trying to become smart, which is a whole different discussion. What's the smartest city in the world? The answer to that question is different cities are at different stages because they prioritize different things. So the real important takeaway is to learn from each other. And so to your question about sustainable developments and eco-friendly developments, we can see that some cities are at a different place in that life cycle. You have a city like New York that has more CO2. The built environment has a greater impact to the environment, to climate, than the automobile in New York City. So buildings are the biggest producers. So that city has prioritized that objective. So they are going to very intensely invest in those outcomes because they've established it as their goal, because that's where they are in their thinking of priorities for their city. That doesn't mean that same problem won't be created 50 years from now in a city that is not yet there. So the opportunity there is to learn from the cities that have made those mistakes and are now trying to actively correct them, so that you can go down a different path. And then I think lastly is cities that might be in different stages can help develop solutions. And so you could do things like smart building or eco-friendly building development here in Bahrain that might be good for Bahrain in 50 or 100 years, but might also serve as something that is valuable to New York today, right? You could test and demonstrate things here because you're doing a lot of new development, and people in New York who are trying to retrofit buildings or when they're building new buildings be eco-friendly, that could learn and benefit from technologies and pilots and developments that occur in Bahrain and in other parts of the world.
Any questions from the audience?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Kai. I'm also an architect, and we had recently a smart city symposium at the University of Bahrain. And it was interesting that everybody is talking about smart cities, smart devices, but what shall we do if the citizens are dumb? Huh? The problem is that technology is developing, but human brain, it seems we got stuck somehow centuries back. So what is your idea how to evolve human thoughts and thinking in order not to get distracted by the smartphones and smart devices, but what about us, the humans?
So I'm gonna start by saying I gave you a bit of my background. I'm a technologist. Maybe I don't know if it's maybe a futurist, meaning I really believe in what technology is doing, and I'm looking, trying to look forward to how it impacts. I spend a lot of time thinking about things like AI and kind of the next machine learning and things that can do things that the human might not be able to do. And I have to tell you, all of that being said, I've had a renewed belief in humans. Just because I made a friend earlier and we were talking a little bit about this, that perhaps just because the machine can produce the accurate answer doesn't necessarily mean it's the right answer. And so, yes, machines can process things better, faster, sometimes, and humans are certainly imperfect. But I think we are seeing much more meaningful outcomes come from a collaborative discussion that puts people at the center. Because at the end of the day, if the technology doesn't make life better for the people, those of us sitting in this room and those of us not in this room, then is it technology to make life better for technology? And if that's the case, then what's the purpose? So I think I qualified that in the beginning by saying I am a technologist and I am trying to find ways to use technology to help cities move forward and make progress. But we are absolutely putting people at the center. We are making sure that we're doing the best we can to make sure that the technology works for people. People need to also be involved in the process, and I think they will certainly evolve and develop along the way also. But I think we have to recognize that that the imperfections of humanity might be the most beautiful thing about it.
Can I maybe add to that? I'm sorry I upset the architect in my conversation, but I think we're also very early on in this technology thing. So if you think about it logically, for you to have any entertainment out of the phone, you have to go through many steps. You got to keep on doing it manually, by the way. It's not really a very smart thing to do what you do to a phone. If any other creature is looking at you while you're using an iPhone, it's actually a pretty dumb set of activities we're doing. I think that will evolve. The way technology will kind of become a bit more in the background. allowing us and enabling us, that will improve in the long run. So that's my opinion. I think there's a lot of positive things to technology. One of the things I'm looking forward to is this exoskeleton becoming available everywhere, so I can run and jump on top of buildings and that kind of stuff. I'd be King Kong. But then there's the downside of us licking down on WhatsApp every 5 seconds, problem we created. Middle Easterns probably more than anybody else in the world, probably. And it's something that we will overcome and probably move forward from. So I think that's my thought on the technology's pros and cons. One more question, please.
Thank you for your presentation, for your talk. Actually, I work for the government as well. I recently retired using this optional retirement scheme. So this conference is very important to me as well, because we are all redundant now and we need to come up with some sort of avenues for revenue. Anyway, while working for the government, I appreciate that Bahrain has a lot of challenges, basically. We have one of the world's most expensive electricity. We have terrible traffic. We're a small island. There are so many issues that we have. I just wanted to know whether Bahrain was part of this city possible group, or anyway, we copy, or we tend to work as, follow the countries in the GCC. We generally tend to follow what is happening in the current Gulf cooperation countries. So I just wanted to have any idea whether there is any solutions for these kind of issues that Bahrain will be facing. It's facing basically the high energy consumption, electricity rates that, we as domestic householders, we are facing very high bills and everything. So it's not one of the, I was just wondering if there was any solutions for these kind of things that you have come across in other cities that we can, take advice from.
That's we are here investing in our relationship with Bahrain and Manama specifically, and look forward to helping the local government achieve what it's trying to do. I will tell you that we are actively moving forward with that discussion about our partnership and our engagement locally here. I will also tell you that the concerns that you expressed, both utility costs and congestion, believe it or not, this is not the first time I've heard those as concerns. They're concerns for cities. Congestion in particular is a concern for nearly every city I talk to. And it's also somewhat relative. I can tell you I've been here for a couple of days now, and I have learned, I'm told over and over, that everything here is 15 minutes away. And that's pretty accurate so far in my experience. And I'm not minimizing the fact that I'm sure during certain times traffic congestion can be much worse, and it affects people's real lives. I'll tell you that in other parts of the city, I could tell you that in Mexico City, for example, I got stuck in an official motorcade. I got stuck for several hours trying to go just a few miles. So it's relative, is my point. But all that being said, it's also, that also is what forces what I was saying earlier, where some cities are forced to really tackle those issues as a priority because of how elevated they are relative to what else is going on. Those solutions that get built the pressure created in such extreme environments might surface solutions creatively that might not come up in other environments, and those can now be shared. So the short story is we're here to partner, we're here to engage locally and bring the learnings from all the other cities we're engaged in around the world. And on the topics that you mentioned specifically, I'm certain that there are other cities who will offer learnings and solutions that they've worked on. Absolutely, certainly.
From my side, I've seen examples of around the city facing same challenges. We're all trying to figure this out. We're hoping that this renewable stuff really works out, and that should show some significant changes in the long run. on the types of tariffs that we will encounter. In the short run, I think we're kind of stuck in this bubble of learning, waiting for all these energy technologies to pick up pace and become viable. 8 years ago, I did a feasibility study of using an LED light in a public park in Saudi Arabia, where it was very cheap and very subsidized. The electricity was so subsidized that the replacement cost, or for me to use that LED light, I would make my money back in 77 years. Can you imagine? So that's where we came from, and I think that was also quite unrealistic and unsustainable in the long run. And today we're kind of bearing a bit of a cost of that is lagging, and hopefully it will adjust in the long run. There are investments being made in all the types of issues that are facing us today, from the government level, from infrastructure level, from et cetera, and these things are being taken very seriously and on the high agenda. But I think these problems are actually being faced by many societies around the world. Fact of the matter is, we're about 10 billion people around the world today. I think Bahrain 10 years ago was half the population as well. So there's significant burden being added to existing infrastructure, and the new infrastructure is unable to sometimes even catch up, and so forth. So I'm hopeful in the long run. In the short run, we have to go through this learning curve. That's my opinion on it. Thank you, Miguel, for this. We were very happy to have you in Bahrain for the first time. I hope you do get to try some of our local stuff. Maybe Gahwat Haji, which is a breakfast place right down the door. You should try the breakfast there. There's one more question?
Yes, gentlemen, good
Sorry.
evening. How are you? Mr. Miguel, welcome to Bahrain.
Thank you.
Even though I'm a fellow American from New York. Excuse my voice right now, but I have a question for you. My name is Mirza Henderson. I actually been very fortunate to be in Bahrain and became a startup in Bahrain after actually retiring from the U.S. Navy as a naval officer and being a federal employee here. I've been very privileged to be a startup here in Bahrain. My experience has been so great that I decided to open an incubator here to facilitate the opportunities for incubators and startups here to do business with the U.S. Navy or the military and DoD as a whole. But what I am identifying recently, the lack of an NDA recognition, or actually people actually not only recognizing it, but maintaining an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. We have my son actually, Angel Henderson, is a fellow at Harvard University, and he works with AI. But when I identify very talented individuals here, very young Bahrainis that are very talented, sometimes when they share the information with someone, even after signing that NDA, sometimes that NDA is not being honored. Mr. Mustasa, what do you recommend? How can I advise my incubees, and how can I protect them when doing business here locally? Because in the United States, when you break an NDA, that could be received as a criminal act per se, because someone's idea must be protected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're very happy that you are set up in Bahrain. I'm a huge fan of New York as well. And so we have this personal affection to that city of jazz and city of Biggie and these guys. I would have an opinion on this rather than as an advice. There's a way to do things in most parts of the world, and usually slowly adapt to them until it adapts to global standards. In Bahrain, what I've seen, because it's a social culture, a small island culture, everybody knows each other. Sometimes we fall into the trap of not understanding the seriousness of the secret we're sharing. And that is something I think you should, if you have foreign companies or foreign staff or foreign incubators, as you call them, coming in, maybe make them a little bit more aware of that. Say, listen, just be careful when you do share information, keep the sensitive information until it's necessary, for example. From our side, actually the legislative reforms have been taking place consistently. We've been trying to educate a lot of the people, throwing out those legislative forums and so forth, trying to get everybody up to par. We're learning as well as a nation. The good thing is everybody here is quite nice and friendly and not hostile. So the usual thing shared is forgotten, and it's a nice thing, and it goes down a silent wave. But it's a learning curve for you guys as much as it is for us. So that's where the two cultures kind of come in, and you gotta figure something out in the middle. I'll tell you something very interesting. It's a cultural thing between maybe a lot of the GCC and some of my American friends. So I obviously, from my accent, I'm U.S. educated. So one of the things that after 20 years of friendship with my American friends that is still confused is sometimes when I go over to the U.S. and we have dinner and I pick up the check, it confuses everybody there. It's like, what am I supposed to do next? Why are you paying? What's happening? You know, and for us, it's very normal. So these are certain things that I think will take a bit of time to get used to. I don't know if you've ever experienced something similar to that as well.
Well, I pick up the check often, so no one ever looked at me confused. I think I got to hang out with your friends. No, but I think listen, coming from having the experiences and engagements with, first of all, thank you for your service. And I appreciate you being here and still trying to engage the startup community here with the U.S. military. I think that's a very interesting. You've taken advantage of a niche, a unique expertise you have. I applaud you for that. I think, to your point, you recognize local culture, you respect it, you know you're working within it. It doesn't mean you can't, as you just did, surface an opportunity to improve it or to strengthen it or to change it so that it is easier to accomplish perhaps some goals that this local community and EDB and others, maybe if they want to engage more with international startups, then making them aware of that is important feedback. But change is a process. And what I will say, I'll take the opportunity to say is, I am, as I said, we engage with cities everywhere in the world, and I have to choose. I have to choose carefully where I apply my time, and I go where I feel a sense of urgency around wanting to achieve progress. That's my long way of saying a heartfelt gratitude to His Excellency and everybody who has brought me here and welcomed me here and hosted me here, and picked up the check. Maybe but it's been fantastic, and I think you are in a place that is listening to what you just said, and I think that's the way of saying it's a journey. It's a journey that you take together, but being in a place that cares for that feedback, I think, is a really important first step.
Yeah, from my side, actually, we have a startups lady that runs our whole startup scene and setup. I'm already in my head, I'm going to send that out to her and say maybe this is something we should look into, and making the startup ecosystem be more aware of it going forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Miguel Gamino and Mr. Ali Murtada, thank you so much. Last but not the least, the last panel for today, the hot topic of the hour. It's time now for the panel Business Revolution and Digital Transformation with B. Chandra Shekhar, CEO of Arab Financial Services Company, BSC. Dr. Bidin Majidi, President and CEO of Dynamica International and a consultant in business innovation, digital transformation, and Industry 4.0 deployment. Dr. Hala Hatoum, entrepreneurship researcher and advocate with a focus on female, youth, and social entrepreneurship, and a faculty member at University of Bahrain. Shayma Elmir, robotics programmer and Google developer, Group Manama co-organizer. The moderator of this panel is Dr. Mazan Ali, chairman of the Department of IS at University of Bahrain and president of Izaka Bahrain.
Excuse me.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the last session of the day. It's always difficult to have a session just before dinner, but I promise you we'll try to make it as interesting as possible. Just to sum up what we had today, I think it was a very interesting and informative forum. We had a speaker talking about stickiness of success, a local speaker, Hamad Fakhro. We had two entrepreneurs Bob and Jeff speaking about their experiences. So some of the lessons learned is you cannot solve old problems with old solutions. So new problems, new solutions. The session for today, or our panel discussion, is about digital transformation and business revolution. With any new technology, with any new innovations such as IoT, robotics, cloud computing, you will require probably changes in the organization structure, processes, and even the mindset. So today we have a set of experts who will speak about their experiences in having these changes done in the organizations. So just to begin the panel discussion, I will start with Chandrasekhar, just to set the scene for the audience. How do you explain digital transformation, what it is?
I think, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me here. Digital transformation, I think in very, very simple words, is how technology will make your life simple and will take you from what we are used to doing to something totally different in the future. Now, my own company, Arab Financial Services, a Bahrain-based company. We've been in business for over 35 years, and we got disrupted in our journey twice. Initially, we were the biggest issuers, or we used to market traveler's checks. We were the biggest sales company of traveler's checks in the region. And anybody here uses traveler's checks anymore? You don't. But we identified that this technology was changing, and credit cards was the new technology which was coming in. So we invested in a credit card processing platform, and that was the first stage of digital transformation. Today, we have already moved to digital wallets, and we see digital wallets now replacing the plastics. In a couple of years, you may not need to use a plastic. You may just have everything on your mobile phone. And already we have seen Bahrain adapting very fast with our own product, which is B-Wallet. People have started using this to shop at most of the merchants. So what is digital transformation? I think if you are used to doing a particular thing the old-fashioned way, using paper, using a slow process, you are about to be disrupted. And we call it digital disruption, which is beyond even digital transformation. But what is the benefit of being or taking part in this journey of digital transformation? It will end up in better benefits for the customer. And we now see not only retailers and customers, telcos, governments, ministries, everybody is getting digitally transformed. And the net result is that the life of the customer is getting easier, it's getting better, and it's getting less expensive. And I think that's what is the biggest thing digital transformation can bring to your lives. It will make things less expensive for you. So I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you. So it's not just about digital products or digital features, it's more than that. So just building on that, Dr. Bejan, maybe you can tell us, if organization wants to go through the digital transformation, what kind of changes do they require in terms of mindset, the strategy? What is your intake on this?
First of all, thank you again for having me here. Digital transformation, I mean, I don't know in the audience if they know the difference between digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation. So there's a lot of hype, a lot of confusion. Digitization, you all remember the fax machine. Fax machine was a digitizing device. You take an analog information and you transform it in digitized information. But that really became a commodity. Everybody was doing it. Then we moved to email. Digitalization is actually when you digitalize and you use the digital technology for an end-to-end process. So you don't just do the digital transformation on the facade. The typical example is a website that has transactional capabilities, but the back end and the back office operation is still the old way of paper-based, process-oriented. Many banks today are still working like that. Many banks, without making names, many banks in the area
do have the tendency of letting you open an account in 2 minutes, but if you want to change any authorization, you have to go with all your paperwork back to the old bricks and mortar branch and do the transaction. So this is a typical example of non-digital transformation. You have just wrapped an old way of doing things with just some facade maquillage. Now, going back to your question, what is necessary in an enterprise? It can be a government entity, it can be a small, medium enterprise, it can be a big, large corporation to do the digital transformation. Now, why you did digital transformation, I think my colleague explained it. You want to simplify things. Sometimes you do it for improving processes, giving efficiency, and sometimes you do it because the ecosystem enables you to be disruptive. You know, not necessarily things come out of your own brain and your own box. Sometimes you have to be also supported by the ecosystem. For example, IoT. I can do the best application for Internet of Things, but if I don't have ubiquitous and full coverage of a telecommunication network, well, then that application doesn't work. So time to market is very important. Look, digital transformation is first and foremost a review of your business process, of your business model. You have to look at what are the pain points in your business, in your value proposition. Again, it can be a ministry that wants to have the citizen pay their tickets online. Then you start reviewing the processes, people, processes, and technology. The application and deployment of technology is actually the least of the issues. And again, our predecessors were talking about technology changes very fast. So you cannot design a digital transformation in an enterprise by focusing on technology, because technology, you have to think in a way that is flexible and you move on. So in a nutshell, digital transformation first and foremost is review your business model, see if the value proposition is still valid, improve it. Sometimes you have the opportunity to disrupt, sometimes you have to react to disruption, and then start doing end-to-end digitalization of processes. And if you do that consistently and cohesively across your boundaries, and your boundaries, again, suppliers are part of your boundaries, your partners are part of the boundaries, so your ecosystem becomes bigger and bigger, then you have a real digital transformation. Amazon is a good example of that, and there are many, many opportunities, luckily, in the industry to do full-fledged digital transformations.
Okay, thank you. Chandra, so Dr. Bejan mentioned that digital transformation requires, end-to-end change in processes. Now, if you look at digital technology, disruptive technologies, let's look at them as an enabler. So when it's considered an enabler, as a strategy, as a top management, as a CEO, how do you move that from top to bottom? What are the ways that you?
I think one of the most important elements is to recognize that you're about to be disrupted as an organization. I think if you get this thinking going in the whole company, it would help. Because often, and I've heard the example of many companies and banks who are not able to transform. I think the idea is to recognize that if you do not transform, or if you do not innovate, there is no future for you. And the more this message is spread across the organization, you can get everybody to come and think digital. And that's when an organization becomes successful. It's not only at the top things we should be digital, we can actually embrace the digital way of doing things. You need every employee to believe that digital is the way forward. You need employees also, which we always encourage, to read more about how companies got disrupted. And there are thousands of examples. People talk today about Nokia versus Apple. People talk about Airbnb versus hotels. People talk about Kodak, how they could not transform, although they had the technology. So it's not about whether the top has a vision that we should be digital. You need every employee in the organization to buy into the digital journey. And I think we are lucky today. We have the internet, we have Google. you could actually have case studies on the best transformations companies have done today. And there are many examples which employees can read. And especially being in Bahrain, we have access, through Google, through case studies, to all the best digital disruption successes that have happened in the world. So at our company, we are encouraging all our employees to read about these disruptions, read about how Paytm is a major success in India, read about M-Pesa in Kenya, how they transformed the whole remittance business. Today, talk about Alipay, WeChat Pay. I think these are all fantastic case studies, and these can be applied in Bahrain and then cascaded to the rest of the region from here as well. And so it's not about the top. It's not about having a vision only at the top. You need every employee to be part of the digital journey, and communication and more research is what is key to making it a success. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may add something on this topic, you asked about the mindset. Look, the mindset is a very difficult thing. Culture and mindset in a corporation is a very difficult thing to develop, and it takes time. It does start at the top, and you need the right environment and the right structure and organization to develop a digital mindset. First of all, you have to have digital literacy. You have to understand where the technology is going. You don't have to be a technologist, but you have to understand the capabilities of technology. You have to prioritize your projects, and that starts from the top. You have to pick your projects. You have to understand the correlation between projects, and then you start putting the right structure. I give you an example. Most of us still live in functional hierarchical organizations, which are completely unsuitable for digital transformations, because digital transformations happen peer-to-peer, horizontal, and not necessarily going through the chain of command or chair of hierarchy, because in that case, nothing would happen. So it does take the top to understand if you want to do a real transformation or just a superficial transformation. If you want to go for the real, you still have to, how do you eat an elephant? You eat it bite by bite. You still have to pick your projects and make sure that for the project number 1, you're creating basically the environment for project number 2, number 3. And this takes roles and responsibility. It becomes project-based. It needs good talent. It needs discipline, because once you give democratization to digital transformation, you need good talents. It's not that you just can, because that becomes anarchy if you don't control it, if you remove the hierarchy of the vertical organization. So all these things together, then slowly, as Jan was saying, you will end up having the employees developing that mindset. But the mindset is like civil behavior. I don't throw paper on the street, not because I have been, because my DNA is better than others. It's because in that street, if I throw it away, somebody will snap on my hand and will charge me $50. Well, the second time I don't do it and I become civilized, I become Swiss. But it's not that the Swiss are better than the Bahrainis or other parts of the world. So digital transformation is the same discipline, rules, regulations, reward systems, accountability, proper measurable objectives, and so on and so forth. And it doesn't happen with an injection of the, digital transformation. It takes time, and it does start from the top. And slowly, slowly, the mindset comes with it.
Thank you. So, as we said, internally we have the structures there, the processes in place, the culture, the skills of people. Now, moving to the external side of things, Dr. Hala, how does the regulation help in these aspects when talking about disruptive technologies or enabling technologies? For instance, in Bahrain we have the FinTech Sandbox or the Regulatory Sandbox by CBP. How does that help the environment?
It's very helpful. In fact, ever since the initiative has been launched, a lot of companies have been coming to Bahrain to set up shop. They've been trying to take advantage of that specific regulation, whereby they have the chance to explore their fintech idea and then grow it. In fact, there have been, I think there's one of the companies is called Rain. They're a cryptocurrency company. I think one of the founders is from San Francisco, and they've come here to Bahrain to set up shop. It's a cryptocurrency company. They don't make cryptocurrency. They actually, it's an exchange. You wouldn't have such an, I've met with them and I've spoken to them, and they've explained to me how the regulation in Bahrain has provided them enough room to come and to set up shop and grow. And they've just recently graduated from the sandbox here in Bahrain, and they're starting, of course, regional, and then they're launching international, which is great. So definitely regulations are very important, not just in the sense of disruptive or enabling technologies in all startup senses. There's a lot to be done there, and I feel sometimes that the way or the speed that things are picking up in terms of startups and the general entrepreneurship ecosystems around us, maybe the entrepreneurs themselves are sometimes ahead of us in terms of regulation. Like we need to catch up in terms of regulation with them, because sometimes they need something that they're not able to get. For example, I've had a lot of lady entrepreneurs who have come with some innovative concepts that they needed to start their businesses with, and they weren't able to because there was no legal identification for that type of business. So the regulations were so far back that they needed to fight for over a year to get the regulations to change and then to get their businesses started. And which means that they had to pay, because up until recently there weren't some things called VCRs or virtual commercial registrations. You just had to get the commercial registration, and to get that you need to have a physical address for your business. And for that you'd need to rent a place, and imagine renting a place while waiting for regulations to change, which takes over a year, and then starting your business. So basically they would come and start up, and they're really dry on finances. So that doesn't help. So regulations are a very big area that need to be updated as fast as possible to match the fast growth of the entrepreneurship scene here in Bahrain.
Okay.
Thank you.
So just a question to the audience. How many of you think that robotics will replace humans in terms of work? Okay, we have a few hands up. The rest of you don't think that's going to happen? So one of our panelists here is one of the youngest youth we have in this forum. She has developed, programmed a robot which is being adopted or used by one of the banks in Bahrain. So do you think that robotics would replace humans?
In my opinion,
Yes,
I do have one here. Sure. Okay, I would say that it wouldn't fully replace a human, but it will be able to perform tasks that humans are not able to do in terms of big data analysis and processing big data. And at the same time, it would open doors rather than close doors, because if we tend to use artificial intelligence and machine learning, Internet of Things, then we'll have more employees to work on the development aspect of the robotics, and we'll have more university majors open for young people to learn more about robotics and artificial intelligence.
Okay. A round of applause. So can you please share with the audience somewhere? Can you please share with the audience your story of how you started with the robot programming and you've worked with a bank to have that as part of their products?
I'm an information communication technology student. I was a student at Bahrain Polytechnic, and for the last semester I had to work with a client or a company to produce a technology project. I was as well working with Bahrain Islamic Bank since 2017, and the head of IT decided to give me a chance to work on my final graduation project with them. So I decided to take the chance. They showed me a list of mobile applications that need to be developed, websites, and several other things that we're used to. And then I just saw the robot over there, and I decided, why not? Even though it's risky and it's something new in the kingdom, but it's something to be proud of at the end of the day. And it will ease the process for customers of BISB to finish their work in a very short period of time rather than waiting for a very long queue to just do a simple task. So I decided to work on the project. I wrote them several scenarios and proposals in which they agreed upon. I was then, the entire project took me almost 3 months to accomplish, and I managed to do it.
Okay, very good, very good. So just the last question, Shema, to you. Do you think Bahraini youth can lead the digital transformation era?
I am highly confident that the youth could do that. And actually, they are leading. I'm a co-organizer at Google Development Group, JDG Manoma, and two of my friends, they work on a project that consists of the technology called Flutter. Flutter is basically a technology that combines native applications in terms of iOS and Android development. And most companies in Bahrain do not use that sort of technology. And people in Bahrain are not hiring for this specific technology, so because they don't know the potential of that of Flutter itself. So they decided to open their own startup businesses, and now they're doing it. So I guess, yeah, I highly believe that it's yes.
Okay, it's good to know. So we'll open the floor for some questions. Anybody has any questions? Mr. Kai has a question as usual. Mr. Kai, no green IT questions.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. My question is related to the technology. It's very on a fast pace. And we had before the question related to the smart citizens of smart cities. I feel sometimes that really the youth, they are coping up with the speed where the older generation who are in charge of laws and regulations cannot cope up with, and then there is a kind of conflict that the development is faster than, let's say, the older generation is thinking to change laws. And this, how could be this solved in the future? Because if the laws will stop developing, then we might have an issue. So maybe Dr. Majidi is the right person to answer this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it working? Now it's working. Look, I don't know why I'm the right person to answer this question, but I will give it a shot. As far as I know, regulation is the regulator is a two-side coin. Most of disruptive businesses disregard completely the regulator. Look at Uber. Uber started as a complete outlaw company, because to run a taxi company you have to have a license, and they just did it. The regulator had to understand and to come and piggyback and recover ground. Now, in certain areas, without regulation, you cannot start that business. And in certain areas, the regulation follows. So now in Bahrain in particular, now I'm blessed to have spent 14 years in this country, and I've started up several companies in different sectors in Bahrain, and they're all doing pretty well. As we say, knock on wood, or as we say, alhamdulillah. So the regulator, for example, in the case of fintech, it's actually an opener and an enabler in the sense of, in other areas, for example, smart city, and I know that you are very much interested, as I am interested in smart cities, is behind. But it's behind because the whole modus operandi of developing a city is behind. Now I don't want to offend anybody, but it's a matter of fact that you need to plan things. And when you build a big skyscraper, you have to plan for all the facilities, but you have to plan also for parking. And when you build two of them, you have to consider also how people. So this is where the regulation can do an excellent job in the development of future smart cities in terms of energy saving, in terms of smart mobility. And believe me, technology is fast-paced changing and is not necessarily the starting point. When you develop something new, you have to know what kind of components are available to you, because you don't want to build something and then go and retrofit it. Now, and you have to give as much as possible flexibility, knowing that technology will evolve. So it really depends on which sector, which industry, what are you looking at. The regulator can play the sword with the two edges. And sometimes it's a blocking element, and sometimes an accelerating element. And if I have to think about, I'm Italian, as you know, we still are using the infrastructure that the Romans built. After the Romans, nothing. So, and we are talking about 2,700 years ago.
I think I'd just like to add to that, that Bahrain actually is the first country in the GCC which allowed hosting of a banking product on the cloud. So the wallet can be hosted on a cloud solution. It's also the first country in the GCC which adopted eKYC as a method, including a WhatsApp video call to verify the customer. So the regulator here, at least in the financial sector, the central bank, is very, very supportive of new ideas, new changes, and we have experienced that ourselves as a company, because when we first went and said we want to host the wallet on the cloud, it was not a no, it was explain how are you going to host it. So regulations will follow, the customer demand and the pull of the product will make sure that regulators will work with us. And there are many other things happening where Bahrain is the first, InsurTech, RegTech, new things are happening in Bahrain, and we are really proud that we are here. And the regulations, as I said, will always favor the customer. And if the customer likes the technology, the regulations can be built to support the technology.
Can I add something as well? In terms of the question asked about how to match between the youth's progressive thoughts or progressive ideas and then the regulations being a little bit backwards in catching up. I think here, any new process or anything at the beginning takes time for things to adapt to it, for people to adapt, for regulations to adapt, for everything to shape up and give it its final look. So we do live in this day and age, in this era where disruptive technologies are the thing. It's happening and we can't hide from it. So definitely regulations will follow up, but it's going to take a little bit more time. And here the responsibility, I think, is on those consultants or mentors who work with both sectors, whether it's the regulators or the youth themselves. And it's their responsibility to bring these two ideas together, to try to match up between what's going on both sides of the coin, as I said. In addition, the youth themselves can make that change. I mean, they can bring it up, they can forcefully bring it to the forefront, and then regulations will soon follow, as I've seen, again, within these experiences. Like I said before, I've had entrepreneurs who start up without any regulations, identifying their product, their idea or their product. But once they do that, and once that happens, the second entrepreneur who's going to go into the same field has that already set up. So the change needs to happen only the one time, and then it's going to be much easier for everyone else to follow through, and then it's going to be on an accelerated rate for everyone else. So that's just how it is. Thank you.
I just wanted to emphasize upon the fact that youths are able to do what it takes, and they do have the potential, and they do have the courage of stepping up. All they need is some sort of support. Even though Tamkeen, Bahrain Startup, Youth City, they're trying their best to support us, we do need more companies, like huge companies, to give us that kind of a support. So I would say just give youth the support that BISB gave me.
Push the ground. Yes, please.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Yes. I'm Prakash Mohan from Ahli United Bank. I'm thankful to the panel for such an interesting discussion. My question is that for digital transformation journey, as we all know that the technology is changing very rapidly. That means whatever we do today, the technology may be outdated very quickly. So with the experience of all five of you collectively, what guidance you can give that when we select a technology in our journey, what kind of things we can look at so that we don't become outdated in a very short span of time. We do understand that we will become outdated, it's a matter of time, but then at least from your experience in a banking sector, what precautions we can take. Thank you.
I'll start with the answer, although I'm not from the banking sector. I think the first thing you need to, be mindful of is that no matter what technology you're going to choose, it might change. It might change very, very soon or very fast, and you might not be aware of that at the time of choosing it. So what you need to do, or what you need to know, is that you need to be adaptive. You need to be flexible. You need to be open to these things happening and having your backup plan or having your next step and knowing where to go. So in my opinion, it's more about a strategy, like knowing where you're headed and what you can use along the way, and not fearing the technology becoming obsolete as much as being flexible to it becoming obsolete and knowing how to adapt and how to move on to something else and not staying in the back. Thank you.
If I may try to, it's a very big, broad question, of course, and you know that, but look, but I want to become, I'm an engineer. So today, engineers are very hype in this room, so I'm happy to say I'm an electronics engineer. And I've worked with banks for many years, especially in the States. We were serving big corporations. You're moving from, if you're in a retail business, you're moving from branches to basically online interaction. And this is becoming more and more with the millennials mindset. Actually, they don't like to come to a branch. So this is a matter of fact. I still go to my bank, but we are really a race in extinction. A bank has a layer of technology investments. We have historically looked at ERP as something that it's looking inwards. And that's good because you're a bank, you're an institution, you have branches, you have multiple outlets, you have different products and different departments. But it's looking inwards, and it's looking at money, employees. And when it comes to CRM, you're looking at the client as a financial token. You're not looking at, and today with big data and analytics, but I don't really know any bank that is really deploying customer data for the benefit of extracting information and for the benefit of simplifying the life of the client and improving and giving and having a better churn and return on from the client, loyalty, advocacy, and on. So ERP, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, was client-server based. Then internet came and said, oh my God, all that money that I invested in, the dedicated lines, if I knew internet was coming, I would not be spending it. But that's a matter of fact. Then internet came. And then now cloud came. 10 years ago, you would have developed your own data center, and then you need a disaster recovery center, and then you need business continuity, and then you need... And say, oh my God, if I knew Amazon was coming, I would have just put it on Amazon from day one, and I would have not spent all that money with the ERP. And so on and so forth. So certain things are not predictable. So you just do it in a way, and if you have hooked with the right partner, the Oracles and SAPs, well, those guys evolve with they are slow, by the way, and they will just give you release 2, release 3, release 4. But if you have hooked up with those, somehow, but your biggest problem is your people that run your hardware and software. Your CIO, your CTO, and by CIO I mean Chief Information Officer and not Chief Investment Officer. Your CIO and CTO, after 5 years, they're obsolete. But in a good sense. And you cannot ask them to do the digital transformation for you because they become asset holders, they become shopkeepers, they maintain your infrastructure and make sure that your service level is 99.9 and you are not hacked and you are cybersecurity. You go there and says, sir, we need to do digital transformation. We need to move to something new. We need to create a new revenue stream. And how can we do it? Shall we close branches? Shall we? No, you cannot ask that question. So it's very difficult. Today, Industry 4.0 is the toolkit, and the toolkit evolves. I mean, years ago, nobody had a Black & Decker. Today, you have Black & So Industry 4.0 see it as a toolkit, but there is one common denominator where you cannot go wrong. Invest on data, and invest on analytics, and invest on business models that look at customers and data. And if you build it on that, then there will be always somebody that comes with the best technology and solution and software. But invest in customers. We are all an industry, now finance is different, financial institutions different, but we are all product oriented, meaning manufacturing oriented, meaning supply chain oriented. In a bank, you are money oriented. You're not customer oriented, you're money oriented. If you start building the other way around, not only in retail, but also in private banking or in corporate business or financial, you will, because customer, in definition of customer can be a corporation, that's your customer. So my only advice is invest in data, start putting together your silos, and that means putting together your organization. Because your organization is the silos organization. Once you have silos by organization, that's why you have different data. That's why you have different information systems. You can do a lot of homogeneous investment and strategically by reviewing your organization and have a vision of where you want to go in the next 10 years. And unfortunately, you have to look at 10 years. 5-year plans are obsolete. You have to have what we call zoom in, zoom out. 10 years and 6 months. 6 months, if you don't have deliverable in 6 months, you're wasting your time. If you don't have a vision for 10 years, you don't know where you're going. I hope I helped.
I think there are 2 rules today. Don't build it yourself. Always buy flexible technology, which you can throw away. The second thing we have to understand is your core banking can remain as your core. But don't try to build solutions inside the core banking anymore. There are enough surround solutions which can interface through APIs. So always build the API layer so that you can buy any latest solution and you have the capability to throw it away and bring something else. So today, for example, if your system supports QR codes, tomorrow it should support biometric, it should support facial recognition. You can't say this will last for the next 10 years, so let me invest in my core banking system. So one of the mistakes which many banks are doing is to change their core bank completely. And then again, after 3 years, they will be obsolete. They will have to change it again. So it is better to build layers to surround systems which will give you the same effect. And for the customer is to build what we call the best customer experience. UX is what it's called, the user experience, which will take your bank miles ahead of competition. There is a lot of opportunities available in the GCC where the UX can be much better and banks can interact much better with their customers. And as you rightly said, Doctor, it is more about revenue per customer. It's not product revenue. It's about revenue to the customer through the life cycle. So not today. If I have taken my first job, you have to treat me as a customer for the next 10 years. So what all can you give me to retain me as a customer for the next 10 years? I think that's the bit where predictive analytics, data analytics, AI, all these solutions will come in and tell you at each point of my life, what does the bank need to interact and what kind of product does it give it to me. So I think, as I said, build a flexible architecture in your IT that you can tap into any surround solutions easy. So that would be my view.
Thank you. Just one last question. Yeah. Yes, please. Running out of time.
Hello? Yes. This is Amin Lingemann from Bank ABC, and I have a question to Shaima, because I'm also a parent, and I notice your age is sweet 23. I have kids, 20, 19, and 15 years of age as well. So how do I get my kids to put positive use to their use in technology? It's good for society, and there could be a lot of time wasters. And how was your journey to make positive use of technology? And did you also do this time wasting as well that then led you maybe to the positive use of it?
So do you waste your time on social media?
I don't see that as a waste of time, in fact. We do learn from social media and different other platforms. At the end of the day, what we look at is the latest technologies in the social media. We get to learn how it works in the background. Google, for example, we tend to spend a lot of time using Gmail every single day, but we don't know the background, how the background works. So even when I use Gmail, I came to realize that there's AI in it. When I use social media, the ads that comes up is basically based on your search. And they tend to use AI to distinguish the things that interests you and the things that does not. And accordingly, they start to show you your interests. And I think that young generations are able to learn from social media and different other platforms because it's never a waste of time. Even though you spend a lot of time on social media, what I do, but I still have the ability of defining my priorities.
So I think our time is up. Thank you very much, and please, if you could give a round of applause to the panelists for the discussion. And we hope you enjoy your dinner. Thank you.
That was a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much. Finally, would like to extend a very warm gratitude and appreciation to our patron, partners, sponsors, speakers, and special guests who graced this event by their cooperation and presence. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us today. Please join us now for the networking dinner.